And how do these ligands and other inputs? Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, so I think the network is not.
Hi, Doc.
Okay, so forgive me. The network, I don't know. Okay, so we are still here, right?
Yes, please.
Hello.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
please.
So as I said, this is the parietal cell. This is the ECL, not NS chemist, but enterochromaffin-like cells. These are the superficial epithelial cells. So the front part here is, say, the lumen. So from the lumen, you are going deep into the tissue. So the lining of the GIT, then deep to the mucosa, the muscularis, and what have you. So you meet the parietal cells, you have the superficial epithelial cells lining. Then at the back of the parietal cells, deep down, you have the ECL. So this is representing neuronal input stimulating possibly a certain receptor called muscarinic subtype 4 on the ECL that can cause histamine secretion and what have you. But the three main areas of interest is the ECL, the parietal cell, and the superficial epithelial cells. Now, we said gastrin could be secreted from, say, the G cells of the pancreas. And we've mentioned that the receptors for gastrin is called the cholecystokinin 2, CCK2 receptor. On the ECL, you can see that we have the CCK2 receptor. Also, on the parietal cells, you can see that they also have the CCK2 receptor, meaning that when gastrin is secreted, it can attack the CCK2 receptor on the ECL as well as the CCK2 receptor on the parietal cells. What then happens if gastrin attaches itself to the CCK2 receptor on the ECL? So on the ECL, there will be several inputs, the so-called signal transductions. The end result is that when gastrin attaches itself to the CCK2, there will be histamine release from the enterochromaffin-like cells. So gastrin attacking the CCK2 receptor or stimulating it will cause the release of histamine from the ECL. And when histamine is released, subtype receptors on the parietal cells. Now, hello? Hello? Hello?
Hi.
Doc,
Hello,
please,
class.
can you take
Can you
the
hear?
last?
All right. Okay, so
Please, can you take the last
what I'm saying is that gastrin has both CCK2 receptors on both the ECL and the parietal cells, as you can see. This is the parietal cell. You can see CCK2 receptor on it. You can also see CCK2 receptor on the ECL. When gastrin stimulates the CCK2 receptor, several chemical inputs occurs within the ECL, what you term as signal transductions. The end result is that histamine will be released from the ECL. And I'm saying that when histamine is released, you have histaminergic receptors on the parietal cells. So we'll come to that part. Now, the gastrin may also directly attack its receptor on the parietal cells. And if this happens, this is a G protein coupled receptor. So several chemical inputs will occur, and then one of those processes will lead to the production of protein kinase C. As you already know, when protein kinase C is produced, then you are producing inositol triphosphate and diacylglycerol. So it's just like the muscarinic pathway. These are coupled to GQ proteins. So these are called they are called the G protein coupled receptors. It's just like the parasympathetic nervous system. So when the gastrin attacks the CCK2 receptor, several processes will go on. Some of them include the production of protein kinase C, that will further lead to the production of inositol triphosphate and diacylglycerol. Forget about diacylglycerol, but inositol triphosphate, its main effect is to cause the release of calcium from the endoplasmic reticulum. That is one of the organelles within every cell, and its main job is to store calcium. The endoplasmic reticulum stores intracellular calcium, and in the presence of IP3, that is inositol triphosphate, the calcium will be released from the endoplasmic reticulum. Gastrin attaching itself to the CCK2 receptor is capable of leading to the production of IP3, inositol triphosphate. And once IP3 is around, calcium is going to be released from the endoplasmic reticulum. The calcium will therefore initiate or make sure that the acid secretion is going to occur. So in the presence of calcium, then the proton pump, this is the hydrogen potassium ATPase. The hydrogen potassium ATPase is the main route through which hydrogen is exchanged with potassium by the parietal cells. So within the parietal cells, you have hydrogen in here. In the presence of calcium, what happens is that the proton pump is activated and hydrogen is pushed out, as you can see from the cell. In exchange, potassium ions will come in to maintain electrical neutrality. I take it again. In the presence of gastrin can activate these CCK2 receptors on the parietal cell. It can also activate the CCK2 receptor on the enterochromaffin-like cells. We are looking at what happens when there is direct stimulation of the CCK2 receptor on the parietal cells. And we are saying that it goes through signal pathways, several pathways, biochemical pathways. The end result is that protein kinase C will be produced. This obviously will cause the release of inositol triphosphate and diacylglycerol. Inositol triphosphate is capable of activating the endoplasmic reticulum to cause calcium release from the endoplasmic reticulum. The endoplasmic reticulum is the main organelle within the cell that stores intracellular calcium. And the moment IP3 is around, it causes the release of calcium from the endoplasmic reticulum. What is then the input of calcium in the release of acid? We are saying that within the parietal cells, you have what we call the hydrogen potassium ATPase. The hydrogen potassium ATPase is the main route through which acid will leave the parietal cell. And when acid leaves, it exchanges with potassium. In the presence of calcium, the ATPase could be activated, and what happens is that the intracellular hydrogen will be pumped out, and in exchange, extracellular potassium will come in to maintain electrical neutrality within the cell, because the cell is supposed to be balanced in terms of electronics. If you are moving a positive charge out, it is not going with a negative charge. So it means that you are going to create more negatives within the cell. So to balance the charges, one H plus goes out, then one K plus comes in to maintain electrical neutrality. So all that I'm saying is that if gastrin stimulates the CCK2 receptor through a calcium-dependent pathway, it will lead to the release of acid from the parietal cell into the lumen through the hydrogen potassium ATPs, aka the proton pump. If you are to consider the muscarinic nervous system, the parietal cell also has the muscarinic M3 subtype receptor on it. Obviously, when the parasympathetic system is activated and acetylcholine is around, acetylcholine can also stimulate the M3 receptor, which is also a G protein coupled receptor. Through several signal transductions, you are producing the same protein kinase C. You produce inositol triphosphate and diacylglycerol. Again, inositol triphosphate will cause calcium release from the endoplasmic reticulum. And this will make sure that hydrogen will be released from the proton pump, and in exchange, you get potassium in to maintain electrical neutrality. So both the gastrin pathway and the muscarinic pathway are calcium-dependent pathway. And both of these pathways can lead to the release of hydrogen from the parietal cell through the hydrogen potassium ATPase, which is also referred to as the proton pump. Any queries? Any issues? So it means that at least we have now discussed two possible pathways through which acid can be released from the parietal cell through the proton pump. One pathway is the muscarinic pathway, which is calcium dependent. Another pathway is the gastrin pathway, which is also calcium dependent. Both can cause the release of acid through the proton pump. Any issues? Any issues? So you can see that the arrows are forward arrows with plus plus. Plus means you are enhancing this pathway. If you see negative, then it means you are stopping the pathway. So once you see plus, then it means you are enhancing the pathway and acid is going to be released. If you see negative, you are stopping the pathway. So now we've been able to describe two of the possible pathways through which acid can be released from the parietal cell. Ionic pathway and the CCK2 pathway, parasympathetic gastrin. Any queries before we go to the third pathway of acid secretion, that is the histaminergic pathway? Any issues? Class captain, any issues? Can I continue?
Yes, I think you can continue.
All right. So now, as I mentioned earlier on, gastrin doesn't only have its receptor on the parietal cell. On the ECL, enterochromaffin-like cells, you can see we have CCK2 receptors as well. Over here, when gastrin stimulates this receptor, several chemical inputs occur. The final result is to cause the release of histamine straight away into the system. And of course, once you have histaminergic receptors there, be it H1, H2, or whatever, histamine can activate any of those. And on the parietal cell membrane, you have H2 there. So histamine can attack the H2 receptor. What happens is that this will not pass through the calcium-dependent pathway, but this is coupled to GS protein. So this one too is also a G protein coupled receptor. So through several signal transductions, cyclic AMP is activated. So adenylyl cyclase will be activated, then you produce cyclic AMP. Once you have cyclic AMP in place, you are definitely going to produce protein kinase A. Remember over here, we produce protein kinase C. protein kinase C will always lead to IP3 and diacylglycerol production. That is normally via the parasympathetic system. The sympathetic system and the histaminergic system will activate adrenal cyclase and you produce cyclic AMP. A is produced. So this will utilize the cyclic AMP dependent pathway. When you produce protein kinase A, what happens is that ideally the hydrogen potassium ATPase normally will not be seen on the membrane. It is actually a cytoplasmic enzyme. So normally it is found here. The hydrogen potassium ATPase is normally a cytoplasmic enzyme. And for acid to be secreted, it must translocate from the cytoplasm onto the cell membrane so that it will serve as a gate or a pathway for acid secretion. So through this pathway, the histaminergic pathway where you produce cyclic AMP and protein kinase A, it activates several cytoproteins. So cytoskeletal proteins within the cytoplasm will be activated. And what they do is that they serve as the pathways through which the hydrogen potassium ATPase can be transported from the cytoplasm onto the cell membrane so that it will establish itself as the gate. I take it again. This ATPase, that's the proton pump, is not actually a membrane enzyme. It is always found within the cytoplasm. So for it to be transported from the cytoplasm to the membrane, it demands certain input. One main input is the cyclic AMP dependent pathway, and that can be activated when histamine is around because this H2 receptor is a G protein coupled receptor, a GS protein coupled receptor, which when it is activated, it also activates adenylyl cyclase. You activate adenylyl cyclase, you produce cyclic AMP. Cyclic AMP around, you are going to produce protein kinase A. When protein kinase A is around, it will activate certain proteins within the cytoplasm that serve as transport pathways. And the activation is all about adding phosphate groups to these cytoskeletal proteins. So we say that protein kinase A will cause phosphorylation of these cytoskeletal proteins. And when these proteins are activated, then the cytoplasmic bound ATPase can now be transported from the cytoplasm onto the cell membrane to establish the gate so that hydrogen can now move through it, and in exchange, potassium comes in to maintain electrical neutrality. So this is how the histaminergic pathway also contributes to acid secretion. It helps to transport the ATPase from the cytoplasm onto or into the cell membrane, and after which hydrogen can now be what? Pumped out, and then potassium comes in. So three main pathways of acid secretion. The first two, muscarinic pathway, acetylcholine activating the muscarinic M3 receptor, and then gastrin attacking the cholecystokinin 2 receptor. Both pathways are calcium dependent, and in the presence of calcium, the hydrogen potassium ATPase is activated and hydrogen is released and potassium comes in. Through the histaminergic pathway, this is cyclic AMP dependent because the histaminergic pathway will activate adenylyl cyclase and you produce cyclic AMP. After which protein kinase A is produced. This will phosphorylate cytoskeletal proteins. And what happens is that the cytoplasmic bound proton pump is found within the cytoplasm can now be transported from the cytoplasm onto the membrane, after which now hydrogen can pass through, and in exchange, potassium occurs. So it means that extraparietal cell potassium is very important for acid secretion, because it should be available so that the exchange can occur. So without potassium being around, then it will be very difficult for hydrogen to come out. So as hydrogen goes out into the lumen, then potassium comes in to maintain neutrality. So potassium in the form of the ionized form is very, very important for the work of proton pump to occur. So without potassium, you find it difficult to be able to release hydrogen. Since these two pathways are calcium dependent, it means that without calcium, we are also going to suffer. And anything that makes sure that we improve our intracellular calcium could also be a threat to excessive acid secretion, because we have two main pathways that are dependent on calcium. So if you can remember, one of the bad side of calcium antacids, calcium-containing antacids, is said to be rebound acid secretion. Rebound acid secretion is one of the side effects of calcium-containing antacids. So they are antacids, all right. They will help you to neutralize the acid that has been released into the lumen. But when the calcium that they've sent in is absorbed, then it can help these two calcium-dependent pathways to increase acid production, the so-called the rebound acid production side effect. Any question on this so far before I continue? So these are the three different pathways through which acid is secreted. Different pathways, but they all pass through, or their final effect, that is the acid secretion, all of them will pass through the proton pump. So be it the muscarinic pathway, gastric pathway, or the histaminergic pathway, acid can only be secreted through only one pathway, that is the proton pump, aka hydrogen potassium ATPase. Any question? Any question? Hello?
No, yes. And so please, my question is, from my understanding of this pathway, the cyclic AMP pathway, it basically would lead to phosphorylation of the cytoskeletal proteins to translocate the cytoplasmic hydrogen potassium ATPase to the membrane to cause the secretion. Yes. Now, I want to understand from the calcium dependence pathway, from what I understood, when you stimulate the receptors leading to the release of protein kinase C to IP3 and all those things, it actually stimulates the hydrogen potassium ATPase to cause the influx of potassium and then the influx of hydrogen. Please, am I right? Yes. So now that we know that it's a cytoplasmic, the hydrogen potassium ATPase is it's in the cytoplasm.
Yeah.
From that pathway, it looks like it's not translocated via that pathway. Am I right?
Yes. So thank you very much. So it means that for these two to work, then it means this should have been transported already onto the membrane. You get it?
Okay.
So in part, for these two pathways to work, it partially depends on this pathway as well, because this is the pathway that will help to bring the thing in. So if you are going to be useless, you get it. One key thing that we shouldn't all forget is that this proton pump is an energy dependent pump. So yes, this is a calcium dependent pathway, this is a cyclic AMP dependent pathway. But the final activation is ATP being available to stimulate the pump. So we should take that one too. So be it these pathways or that pathway, energy is needed to actually stimulate the pump. But the pump must come onto the surface before the hydrogen can pass through. And for that matter, these two, they will work, but it partially depends on the histaminergic pathway also being activated. Any other question? Any other question? Yeah, hello?
Yes, please. So the issue about the ATP. So I understand, from my understanding, the hydrogen acid is secreted when you are hungry, right? And then in the fed state too,
When you are
there's
hungry,
more secretion of acid
when you are hungry,
in anticipation of food.
Yes, so that's the right thing.
Okay, so in anticipation of food, acid
Yeah.
is secreted.
Yeah.
Okay, and then when you are fed to, more acid is secreted to break down the food you've taken in.
Yeah, so in
So in the
anticipation and when the
fasting,
food is actually coming. Yes.
Okay, so I wanted to clarify, in the fasting state and then in the fed state, which of these two states would actually lead
Hello?
to hello, doc, please, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes, so please, I was asking, in the fasting state and in the fed state, which of these two would actually lead to the secretion of more hydrogen ions into the lumen?
Okay, so basically we have I'm yet to explain that one. We have what we call the basal acid secretion. That normally is not dependent on whether you are eating or not, or you are anticipating something. Then we have stimulated acid secretion. That is when, excuse me, that is when maybe you are thinking about some meal or a certain food is actually coming. So the basal one is like natural. It doesn't need any stimulant. And that one, through maybe another input from parasympathetic activation or whatever, that one will be ongoing. It is basal. It doesn't need any stimulant before it occurs. So normally when you are not eating and maybe you are thinking of some food, then of course, remember that whether you like it or not, the problem is that the basal one that is released is not as much as compared to the stimulated one that is coming. But still, if you don't have anything protecting your GIT lining, and the baby smaller, the amount that comes in is not that much, it is still enough to give you peptic ulcer. Unfortunately for us, whenever you are hungry, then you'll be thinking about food. Then your system thinks about getting ready because something is coming. You pass through somebody's back door, then the aroma flies through your nose. Then your body thinks that, hey, this guy is about to eat. Let me prepare myself and release acid to protect, to activate certain enzymes for digestion and what have you. Unfortunately, the food is not going to come. And when the acid is secreted, it falls on the lining and then it causes injury. So both the basal and the stimulated are capable of giving you problem. Just that the basal one, the amount that will come in is few. It doesn't depend on any stimulant, but you will still be secreting it. But since you don't have enough protection by, let's say, the food covering the lining, if you have eaten, then when the acid is secreted, it will fall on the food. Few will attack the lining of the stomach. But since you don't have anything in there, the acid falls on your GIT lining, then it will cause an injury. If the stimulated one comes in, yet food is not coming, then that one you are dead. Because you are going to have copious amount of acid release. It falls onto your lining because the body thought food is going to come. Food did not come, and then you are now in trouble. So both the basal and the stimulated can cause problems. The parasympathetic pathway, for example, you can have parasympathetic inputs coming in. You can have gastrin release. coming in, histamine release from other sources that can cause problems, beta. And when you eat too or you think about eating too, then that one too can lead to excessive acid secretion. I hope it's better.
Yes, please. Thank
All right.
you.
So let's look at the others. Any other question? So note that at least you have 3 pathways through which acid can be released through the proton pump. But the proton pump is an energy-dependent pump. So regardless of whether it is calcium-dependent pathway or cyclic AMP-dependent pathway, the pump itself will need to be activated by consuming energy. By so doing, hydrogen comes out, it exchanges with potassium, it goes in to maintain electrical neutrality. You can see that there is a minus sign here, which means that we are stopping this pathway. And the arrow is coming in from the EP3 receptor. The EP3 receptor is the prostaglandins receptor that can be found on the parietal cells. So you produce prostaglandins from arachidonic acid metabolism. So arachidonic acid is metabolized, and one of the end products will be prostaglandins. You know that prostaglandins are involved in inflammation, a bad thing that normally people think about. But inflammation itself is not actually a bad thing. It's a protective mechanism. Just that excessive stimulation of this pathway will give you problems. One of the good things that, apart from immune defense, that prostaglandins will do is to stimulate the EP3 receptor on the parietal cell. When this happens, it antagonizes the histaminergic pathway of acid secretion. So we say that prostaglandins are part of the protective factors against the development of ulcer. Because when this pathway is allowed, you are going to release acid, peptic ulcer may occur. If you cancel it, then acid through this pathway is not going to be released. So prostaglandins are one of those protective factors that will help us a lot. So when you produce prostaglandins, you are minimizing acid secretion. Unfortunately, you see this guy, NSAIDs, glucocorticoids. They will make sure that prostaglandins are not produced from arachidonic acid in the membrane. So it means that when you take NSAIDs, you take glucocorticoids, you are not producing prostaglandins. If you are not producing prostaglandins, then you are not going to oppose the histaminergic pathway. And if the histaminergic pathway is activated, there is no opposition. The final fate is that you are releasing acid that will contribute to ulcer. Hence, they say NSAIDs, glucocorticoids are one of those risk factors when it comes to peptic ulcer disease. Because what they do is to prevent the production of prostaglandins. We need prostaglandins to stop one of the pathways of acid secretion. And if prostaglandins are not being produced because we have taken NSAIDs, because we have taken glucocorticoids, then the opposition is removed, acid secretion is enhanced. Again, when you have prostaglandins being produced from arachidonic acid on the superficial epithelial cells, we also have the prostaglandins receptors there, the EP3 receptor. You can see everything is plus, plus, plus. So it means we are enhancing this pathway, no negative. When the prostaglandins attach themselves to the EP3 receptor on the superficial epithelial cells, where are they found? Throughout the lining of the GIT. You remember, superficial epithelial cells can be found everywhere within the line of the GIT. What happens is that you have the release of mucus and you have the release of bicarbonate. What will mucus do? This is the lumen. So the mucus can line itself and protect the lining of the GIT from the direct harmful effect of hydrogen ions. So when you have mucus being released, it will cover the lining of the GIT. So when the acid comes in, it doesn't have direct contact with the lining of the GIT, but it will have a direct contact with the mucus. So the mucus is serving as a protective shield so that the acid doesn't have direct contact with the GIT itself to cause damage. Again, when you produce bicarbonate and release, the bicarbonate can also neutralize the acid. So it can serve as an antacid, just as you take antacids to try and neutralize hydrogen ions. Prostaglandins can cause the release of bicarbonate from the superficial epithelial cells, and this can neutralize gastric acid. That can minimize the harmful effect. So prostaglandins are very, very important. They can block acid release. They can help cause the release of mucus that protect the lining, and also cause the release of bicarbonate that can help neutralize the acid that has been released.
Hello, sir.
Yeah, hello?
Yeah, please. I didn't get the part where the EP3 receptors on the epithelial cells. I didn't get what they did.
So, all right. So on the superficial epithelial cells, you have the EP3 receptors. These receptors can be stimulated by prostaglandins. So when you produce prostaglandins from arachidonic acid metabolism, it can act on the EP3 receptor. The final response is that you can see all the pathways are plus, plus, plus. So the final response is the release of mucus from the superficial epithelial cells, which can protect the GIT lining from a direct, it doesn't have direct contact with the GIT lining, but it falls on the mucus, and that can help you protect you from the acid causing injury. Again, this same prostaglandins acting on the EP3 can cause the release of bicarbonate. This is a base. Once you have a base, it can neutralize the acid, and that can help protect you from the harmful effects of the acid. Is it okay? So 3 main benefits here for prostaglandins. Reduction of acid secretion by antagonizing the histaminergic pathway. On the superficial epithelial cells, the release of both mucus and bicarbonate. Bicarbonate neutralizes the acid. Mucus forms a cover that protects the GIT from direct contact with the acid. If you pour acid on somebody, you are going to cause injury. So here is like the stomach lining is wearing something, a protective cover that prevents the acid from having direct contact to cause injury, but it rather falls on the mucus. Is it okay? Is it okay?
Yes.
Class captain.
Thank you.
All right. Again, you can see some muscarinic receptor here. This is muscarinic subtype 3. When acetylcholine comes here, similar processes will occur, same as that of prostaglandins, both mucus and bicarbonate release. So now, from this huge image here, we've tried to explain the 3 different mechanisms through which acid is released. One of them is the parasympathetic pathway and the gastrin pathway. Both pathways are calcium dependent. Then the histaminergic pathway, which begins all the way from gastrin attacking the CCK2 on the enterochromaffin-like cells, causing the release of histamine from it. Histamine attacks the H2 receptor on the parietal cell, and through cyclic AMP-dependent pathway, you produce protein kinase A phosphorylation of cytoskeletons within the cytoplasm, which helps to translocate the cytoplasmic bound proton pump onto the surface. So once you have it here, in the presence of ATP, the proton pump is activated. What happens is that hydrogen moves out, in exchange, potassium comes in, meaning prostaglandins, which when it's not released, again, on the superficial epithelial cell, it will help us to release mucus, which is an antacid. Muscarinic inputs can also be activated by acetylcholine. You have mucus and bicarbonate release. So these pathways, several of these pathways can be manipulated either to cause acid secretion and lead to ulcer, to block prostaglandins release, and then we get ulcer from acid release, or we improve the production of prostaglandins, or we allow prostaglandins to be produced naturally. Then we antagonize the histaminergic pathway to prevent ulcer. You produce mucus bicarbonate to also prevent ulcer. You can also antagonize these pathways, the M3 pathways. So selective muscarinic M3 receptor antagonist can be used to block these receptors, especially the one on the parietal cells, so that this pathway cannot occur. So you have agents like pyrazipine, which can selectively block the M3 receptor on the parietal cell. By so doing, this pathway will not occur. One other thing that we have also learned from this slide is that calcium, since it is needed for these two pathways, if you give the body more calcium, then it can enhance this pathway to cause acid secretion. And for that matter, if you have hyperacidity and you want to use antacids and you choose the ones that contains calcium, say calcium carbonate, then of course it is a base. So you will have neutralization of the secreted acid. But eventually, when the calcium is absorbed into the parietal cell, it can help activate these two pathways. Then you release the acid, the so-called the rebound acid secretion, as a side effect of calcium-containing antacids. Pharmacologically, you can also block the final pathway of acid secretion, so that be it from the muscarinic pathway or the gastrin pathway or the histaminergic pathway, since they all have one final pathway through which the acid will be released. If you block this final pathway, if you block the hydrogen potassium ATPase, then indirectly it means you have blocked the effect from all the three pathways. And for that matter, it will be more prudent, if there are no contraindications, to block this final pathway than, for example, selecting, say, the H2 receptor and blocking it. Because if you block only this, the remaining two pathways can still cause acid release. But if you block the final pathway, indirectly, you have blocked all the three at the same time. Because even if they are activated, but the final pathway is blocked, it is still no acid secretion. And this is one of the reasons they say proton pump inhibitors are superior to histaminergic H2 antagonists when it comes to the control of acid secretion, or when it comes to intragastric pH control, because the PPIs will block the final pathway, so none of the three will be able to give their effect. If you block only this with, say, cimetidine, an H2 receptor antagonist, remember, you still have these two pathways, so they can still cause acid release. PPIs blocking here, we are done. You can see some antibiotics here. We are going to talk about it because there is this guy who is found within the antrum of the stomach. It is called H. pylori. It can also cause a lot of inflammation and contribute to ulcer. And therefore, since it is a bacteria, then we can use chemotherapeutic agents, antibiotics, and other agents that can kill bacteria, even though they are not mainstream antibiotics, to try and destroy this guy. So if you are seeing antibiotics here, then it means their target is this small guy here that can cause inflammation around the duodenum and the stomach and give us ulcer. Any question? So focus on this slide because most of the treatment and most of the etiologies of ulcer, both treatment and the causes, are based on this slide. Any question, class captain? So once we know this, then it will be easy for us when we get to the management, when we get to the etiologies. We have a fair idea of the aggressive or the causes and the protective factors. Class captain, is it okay?
Yes, please.
All right. Okay. So enough on acid secretion. We've spent almost about 30 minutes to 40 minutes. Now, God is so good. Acid is always being secreted because of the basal secretion. So God has made everything possible that, yes, you need acids to be secreted because the work of acid is not only about bad things. It's supposed to go in there to even activate enzymes, create optimum pH for them. Even it is part of the immunity because the food and the water and the drinks that we normally take in, they are not sterile. So by all means, they go in there with microbes. If the acid is there, it will help and defend you by killing them. So acid is not always about bad things. So it is good that we have basal secretion. It doesn't depend only on the stimulated ones. If so, then there should be a way to also protect the GIT from the possible erosion of the acid. And therefore, the following mechanisms are in place to do that. One of the key things is adequate mucosal blood flow. Adequate mucosal blood flow. In fact, the GI lining, the cells there are one of the cells that we normally describe as cells with high turnover rate. Cells with high turnover rate, meaning that they die and they are quickly replaced. They die early, but they are quickly replaced. Another example is hair. Hair, they grow, they die. They grow, you cut them, they grow. So they also have high turnover rate. Another example is your red blood cells. Very soon, 120 days, 90 days, they are dead and gone. Then you replace them. So these cells are normally described as cells with high turnover rate. And for that matter, to produce, to replace what dies, you will need nutrients. You will need proteins. You will need several other inputs. Where will these inputs come from? The blood will supply them. So if you don't have adequate mucosal blood flow to supply the ingredients needed to what? Meet the very fast production to replace the fast dying cells, then you are going to have a deficit. So adequate mucosal flow is very important. And this guy called prostaglandins has a vasodilatation effect. So in addition to blocking this pathway and producing mucus and bicarbonate, through its vasodilatation effect, it can also improve the flow of blood towards the GIT, adequate mucosal blood flow. And that can help us regenerate, reproduce the GIT lining, the cells, as and when they die, so that we don't get injuries. So adequate mucosal blood flow mediated by prostaglandins is one of the defense mechanisms. Secretion of mucus, I've explained that one. So the mucus, when it is secreted, either through parasympathetic or prostaglandins input, will coat, it will cover the mucosal surface so that when the acid comes, it will rather have contact with the mucus, but not the mucosal surface to cause an injury. Even the ions that are diffused in there, for example, potassium ions that is needed to cause this exchange, the mucus will minimize its inflow. So if you don't have excessive potassium there, then you can also have limited hydrogen outflow. And of course, finally, even the pepsin. Remember, the stomach lining is also protein. Every protein be protein. So if pepsin is around, it can also digest the stomach lining. So it is not always HCl that can cause injury. Even the enzyme pepsin that is released as pepsinogen and activated by HCl to pepsin. If it also has direct contact with the stomach lining, then it can also digest it. You get an injury. Of course, bicarbonate, that is also secreted, can also neutralize the excessive acid and serve as one of those defense mechanisms. So adequate mucosal blood flow towards the GIT, secretion of mucus, secretion of bicarbonate, all of them, we understand that prostaglandins can do this. These are all part of the defense mechanisms. And for that matter, prostaglandins are very important when it comes to protecting the body. Naturally, they are produced from arachidonic acid metabolism. The cyclooxygenase pathway. Hello, please mute your mics. All right. So note these defense mechanisms. They are very important in protecting us from getting blood flow, mucus secretion, bicarbonate secretion. Prostaglandins can do all of this. So we need prostaglandins as one of the protective mechanisms. I hope this is clear. If you have mentioned protective mechanisms, then aggressives are also there. So as the protectives protect us from getting the ulcer, these guys are around to give us ulcer. So obviously, the worst culprit, hydrochloric acid from the parietal cells, highly acidic. The pH of the stomach can even go as low as 1.5. Very, very strong acid, and this can cause injury to the mucosal lining of the stomach. Pepsin, that is the enzyme that digests protein, the mucosa, so it can be what? Digested. Gastrin, you remember, it has both direct and indirect acid secretion. So this is the direct acid secretion, and when it passes through this pathway, through histaminatic pathway, it will give you the input serve as part of the aggressive factors. Agitated in cases where your pyloric sphincter, remember the pyloric sphincter over here, that controls inflow and outflow of substances into the stomach. So if, let's say, you have your bile acid here in the small intestines and this sphincter is loose, then the bile acid can pass through and cause problems in the stomach or can cause problems in the duodenum. So bile acid regurgitation can also serve as one of the aggressive factors. Once it is an acid, it's an acid. Relatively, in terms of strength, it will have a lower strength than HCl, but it is still enough to contribute to ulcer production. Any question? So note the defense mechanisms and the aggressive mechanisms. These are natural within the body. We are not talking about outside the body. Within the body itself, we have defense mechanisms that protect us from getting ulcer. Then we also have aggressive factors that can give us ulcer. Through our own doings, we can also bring in worse things that can help the aggressive factors to work more. Then the defensive mechanisms will be defeated. Then we get ulcer. So we will look at etiologies and risk factors and what have you. These are external factors. But internally, we have aggressive factors, as you can see, and you know their role, what they do to contribute to ulcer. Then the protective ones, what they also do to prevent us from getting ulcer. Any question? Any question?
Yes, I have a question.
Okay.
Can you please explain? So please go back to the previous slide. That's the last two slides. The previous one. Okay, can you please explain the slow ion diffusion? I didn't get that part.
This one.
Yeah, under the secretion
Okay,
of
so,
mucus ion diffusion.
Yeah, so you have the mucus lining the GIT. Remember here, we said the secretion of hydrogen is highly dependent on potassium coming in. Potassium is an ion. So if you have within the GIT, say ion, but the ion is not having a direct contact with the GIT lining because there is a coat of mucus in between the ion, that is potassium, and the GIT lining. It minimizes the penetration of the potassium into the deeper areas of the GIT, and of course, its proximity to the parietal cells. Because once potassium finds itself close, very close to the parietal cell, then it can easily exchange. It can easily go in, and then the hydrogen will be what? Secreted. With this, barrier, minimum ion through the mucosa for the exchange to occur. Is it okay? Hello?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Any other question? Okay, so let's look at the root cause. The root cause, the etiologies of peptic ulcer disease. So here mainly we are concerned about the external aggressive factors, external input. So as I was talking about, you can see this guy, H. pylori. This is an infection that normally you get it normally in childhood. Almost similar route of infectious or infection, just like the way you get typhoid fever. But normally, if you get it, it is through childhood where you don't know anything. You play around, eating sand and those things anyhow. So this guy here is very, very stubborn in that where it can stay within the GIT, the acid there is very strong. That acid can even kill almost every other microbe. But this guy is able to survive within the acidic regions, the antrum, when you find the parietal cells, that acid is secreted. Very, very strong acid. But HCl is not able to kill this guy because it has defensive mechanisms that later we are going to talk about. It is able to neutralize the acid close to its surroundings so that it doesn't die. It also has some means to move around and at times dodge areas where you have high acidity. But one bad thing is that it has virulent mechanisms to be able to establish extensive inflammation that leads to cell death and, of course, ulceration. So if you get an infection from H. pylori, that is how it contributes to ulcer. We will look at it very soon. Then people can suffer from critical illness, acute stroke, acute MI, severe injuries, what have you. So once you are stressed, you remember you are going to release stress hormones. Once you suffer from stress, either from critical illness or from accident or whatever, you release a lot of stress hormones. Key agent among the stress hormones is cortisol. Key agent among the stress hormones is cortisol. When it comes to cortisol, in relation to peptic ulcer, you can mention cortisol when you are talking about hyperglycemia and fluid retention and what have you. But in relation to peptic ulcer, this is what cortisol will do. Cortisol works just like when you take drugs called glucocorticoids. So it's the same. Glucocorticoids, the natural cortisol, they all have the same effect. So what cortisol and glucocorticoids will do is to enhance gastrin and parietal cell hyperplasia. You know what this is pointing towards. Gastrin and parietal cell hyperplasia. It means you are going to release a lot of gastrin. You are going to release a lot of acids. Unfortunately, whilst it is causing excessive release of gastrin and HCl, there will be what? Diminishing gastric mucus synthesis. So they enhance the aggressive factors and fight against the defensive mechanism. Mucus synthesis will be diminished by glucocorticoids, probably through the antagonism of arachidonic acid metabolism that will lead to prostaglandin synthesis. So glucocorticoids, cortisol released during stress, will inhibit arachidonic acid metabolism, meaning you are not producing enough prostaglandins. And if you are not producing enough prostaglandins, you will have a reduced mucus production, you have reduced bicarbonate release, you fail to antagonize the histaminergic pathway, you are in trouble. Unfortunately, it won't do only this. It won't only antagonize the defense mechanisms, but it will also enhance the aggressive pathways by causing the hyperplasia of parietal cells and gastrin. So this is how critical illness that will lead to the release of cortisol. And people who do take glucocorticoids in excess, this is how they get ulcer from these two inputs. NSAIDs, you remember, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory agents, they are here and they are canceling arachidonic acid metabolism, meaning you are not going to get prostaglandins production. And this effect is systemic. It happens within the body, not just within the lumen of the GIT. I'm saying this because people think that, oh, when you take NSAIDs, take it after meals. So even if you have a history or something, history of ulcer, if you take it after meals, they are thinking about the local effect, irritation of the NSAIDs, or maybe some of them are weakly acidic. So people are thinking about always the local effect. This effect that we are talking about is not the local effect. It happens after when the NSAID has been absorbed and it is doing its normal mechanism of action to protect or to heal your pain. It does so by blocking arachidonic acid metabolism, by attacking the cyclooxygenase enzyme. And this is systemic effect, not a GI local effect. So telling people to take NSAIDs after meals does not solve the issue because the effect is not local, the effect is systemic. But note that some do have acidic properties. And in addition of the systemic effect, locally, that can also contribute to the ulcer or GI irritation. But the main effect of NSAID is the systemic input that will cancel out arachidonic acid production. When you take chemotherapy, for example, when you are treating ulcer, through selective toxicity, you have done chemotherapy, and chemotherapy thrives on selective toxicity. The principle is that the drug should cause harm to the invader, which is the microbe or cancer cells, and relatively cause less harm to the host, you, the human being. One of the inputs that chemotherapeutic agents take advantage of is faster turnover of cancer cells. So cancerous cells, they grow very fast. And these chemotherapeutic agents, they have affinity of cells with high turnover rate compared to normal cells that grows normally. So that is how come when you take chemotherapeutic agents, they preferably attack the cancerous cells with faster turnover rate relative to healthy cells that have a slower turnover rate. But unfortunately, I've already mentioned at least 3 cells that also do have a faster turnover rate. The cells of the GI lining, RBCs, and the hair cells. So if you can remember, you realize that when people take chemotherapies, they get badness because chemotherapies, they are not able to distinguish between the faster growing cancerous cells and also the faster. They do also get anemia because red blood cells also do have a faster turnover rate, and therefore the green or the faster turnover cancerous cells will also attack the faster turnover red blood cells, and hence you get anemia. Then some chemotherapeutic agent will also give you ulcer because they also attack the GIT lining cells that do also have faster turnover rate. They are not able to distinguish between the cancerous cells with faster turnover rate and these cells who do also have faster turnover rate. And therefore, this becomes the side effect of chemotherapeutic agents. Alopecia, anemia, then GI ulceration. So those who have been doing oncology realize that in most cases, they may add a PPI to help protect the GIT from getting wet in terms of ulcer. Any questions? Any questions? So note NSAIDs, glucocorticoids will act the same as stress-induced ulcer through cortisol. Then chemotherapy, inability to differentiate between the faster turnover cancerous cells and the faster turnover GIT lineage. So it will attack the cancerous cells and also attack the GIT lining because both are faster growing cells. And chemotherapy thrives on that in relation to selective toxicity. They leave the host relatively unharmed because the cancerous cells do have a faster turnover rate. Unfortunately, there are cells that are normal but also do have faster turnover rate. And the chemotherapeutic agent can't distinguish them from the cancerous cells and attack them. Hence, the hair loss, the anemia, and the GI ulceration during chemotherapy. Then you can have issues like hypersecretory states, the so-called Zollinger-Ellison syndrome. So people can get, for example, cancerous G cells of the pancreas, gastrinomas, and they release a lot of gastrin that can do both direct and indirect acid secretion. And therefore, they release excessive amount of acids that can lead to ulcer production. Nicotine, if you smoke cigarette, you are not talking about marijuana and other things. Nicotine is found in cigarettes. What nicotine will do is to minimize mucosal blood flow. Remember, we said we need mucosal blood flow to what? Send nutrients, send amino acids so that when the faster turnover cells die, we can easily produce more to replace them so that we don't get deficits. Nicotine on itself will inhibit prostaglandin synthesis. And of course, it can also enhance the regurgitation of bile acid from the GIT, that is the duodenum, small intestines, even into the stomach to contribute to ulceration. If you take alcohol, especially excessive alcohol intake, some of the alcohol, they are very strong in terms of percentage strength. So they can cause irritations and also weaken the stomach lining. That may lead to inflammation and, of course, ulceration. Radiation. If you have cancer, you can use radiation as one of the options to heal the cancer. Radiation kills the cancerous cells. If you are not lucky and the GIT is exposed to the radiation, then the GI lining can also die from radiations. If you get infections, of course, you have already mentioned bacterial infection. Some viral infections can also cause significant inflammation, and that can also contribute to ulceration. So, for example, infection from the cytomegalovirus. If you get Crohn's disease, it's an autoimmune reaction that can cause inflammation throughout the entire length of your GIT. This can cause ulceration. At times, you can search and search and search. None of these inputs could be identified as the cause. Then you become an idiot. In that case, you are idiot because you are unable to find the underlying cause. So we describe it as idiopathic. You are an idiot. You are unable to identify the etiology of this person's ulcer. You don't know what is causing it. It's not its It's not Zollinger-Ellison. It's not cigarette. It's not alcohol. It's not radiation. It's not Crohn's disease. You are confused. Yet the ulcer is there. All these you can't find, but the ulcer is there. In that case, you have become an idiot. Why is it that there is a problem, but you can't find the cause? Then you term it as idiopathic peptic ulcer. Any question? So any condition that you find it difficult to find the etiology or the root cause, you say that it is idiopathic. It means you are an idiot. You are an idiot because you are supposed to know and you are unable to identify. As simple as that. So idiopathic causes means the one who is trying to identify the cause is an idiot. And therefore, he has termed the thing as what? Idiopathic. You can have idiopathic peptic ulcer without any known cause. Any question? Any question? Class captain. Class captain, any question?
No, please. No question.
All right. All right. So H. pylori. H. pylori. This guy is very stubborn, so we need to look at it because it is very common both in the two types of ulcers. So it is a gram-negative bacteria, and when all other bacteria they are running away from the gastric region, this guy, it doesn't care. It is able to live within these gastric areas where you have excessive acidity. You get it normally when you are young because you play around a lot. And the worst thing is that if things are not moving well, where you are living, you are not feeling that good, you are poor. So lower socio-economic environment, you easily get it. It has the following virulent factors, things that helps it to survive and also cause harm to us. One of them is the release or the production of a certain enzyme by this H. pylori called urease. Urease enzymes are named according to the substrate they act on. So urease doesn't mean that it acts on urea. That is true. So urea, it means that enzyme can act on urea. So the enzyme that is released is called urease. When this urease is around, it is able to break down urea into ammonia and carbon dioxide. The ammonia is basic, and therefore it can neutralize the acid within the surroundings, just as the bicarbonate can do. So it falls into the acidic region, it releases urease. Any urea that is there is broken down to carbon dioxide and ammonia. And ammonia will neutralize the acid within that region so that the acid will not kill it. So when it survives, then it is ready to cause harm to us. In the presence of these toxins, we have the cytotoxin-associated antigen A and the vacuolating cytotoxin antigen. These two toxins are present within H. pylori, and with this, it can cause significant or extensive mucosal inflammation, leading to tissue damage. This is how H. pylori contributes to our woes when it comes to peptic ulcer disease. The sad thing is that it does all these useless things, run away from that area, move to another region and cause another inflammation because it has flagella, means of motility. So it survives by releasing the urease enzyme, breaking down urea to ammonia and carbon dioxide. The ammonia neutralizes the acid. It uses these toxins to cause excessive inflammation and tissue damage, that is ulcer. Flagella, with it, it runs away to another area and causes two peptic ulcer. And of course, be it duodenal or gastric, H. pylori normally will have a role to play. So we will look at that. So it means that in most cases, you need to identify the presence of this guy. And if it is around, you try to kill it with appropriate antibiotics. Now, let's look at the common forms of PUD. Are we okay? Are we okay here? Last captain, you know I always ask you because maybe your people may not respond. So class captain, when you say yes, then it means everybody is okay. Class captain, are we okay with the virulent factors of H. pylori?
Yes, please.
Yes, okay. So write its name. It's a bad agent, very stubborn. So write the name, H. pylori. Always remember H. pylori. Now, there are at least 3 different forms or 3 different ways by which we can describe the etiologies of peptic ulcer. So mainly the most popular ones, either it is H. pylori induced, NSAIDs induced, or stress-related mucosal damage. SRMD means stress-related mucosal damage. So you are thinking about stress, cortisol, stress-related mucosal damage, NSAIDs-induced H. pylori. These are the 3 most common forms of PUD. And in terms of the chronicity, site that is normally damaged, their relation with intragastric pH, symptoms, and others, this is how it goes. So H. pylori induced and NSAID induced are normally chronic in nature. But the stress-induced one is normally acute. It comes within a short time. When you treat, it's gone. But these 2 will make sure that you suffer for a very long time. The site of damage, H. pylori is more tilted to duodenum than the stomach. That doesn't mean that those with gastric PUD, they don't have H. pylori. They do, but it is more common with duodenum or duodenal ulcer than gastric. But NSAIDs infection is on the pH of the stomach or the duodenum. The NSAID one and the stress-induced one, they are less dependent on it. Then symptoms. H. pylori is epigastric, NSAID and stress-related ones normally may be asymptomatic. So the wound is there, but you may not feel any pain. But H. pylori, normally you have an epigastric pain. For H. pylori, the wound is deep. The wound is deep, whilst the remaining 2, you have superficial input. But in terms of bleeding, it is more severe with NSAIDs and the stress-related one that is acute as compared to the H. pylori. Risk factors in general, almost the same as the etiologies. Risk factors, the same as etiology. So you can see H. pylori here again, critical illness, nicotine, NSAIDs. And then, so NSAID, aspirin, remember aspirin. So aspirin 2 is a cyclooxygenase inhibitor, and therefore it can prevent prostaglandin synthesis. KCL and the serotonin, the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, drugs that are used in the management of depression. These actually, in fact, this one will not actually contribute to the ulcer, but it can improve your chances of bleeding because they can cause the prevention of platelet aggregation. So yes, naturally they won't cause the ulcer, but because of this action, inhibition of platelet aggregation, if the ulcer begins to bleed, or the ulcer will have a high tendency to bleed. KCl, you remember the input of potassium, it exchanges with hydrogen. So if you have KCl can enhance more acid secretion because of what? The presence of potassium. And with excessive acid secretion, you can get ulcer. Glucocorticoids, we've talked about it. And dietary factors, your dietary content. You have a lot of inflammatory possible agent that can cause inflammation, spices, your pattern of eating, you starve because you don't have money. So you want to do strategic eating. You eat the whole day around 4 p.m. or 3 p.m. so that it can take care of both breakfast, lunch, and supper. Do you do that? Because remember, you are having basal secretions. So that one, it doesn't matter whether you eat or not, the acid will be secreted. So these ones, all of them can serve as risk factors when it comes to peptic ulcer disease. And they are almost the same as the etiologies when it comes to ulcer. What is then the pathophysiology in peptic ulcer disease? Very simple. Very simple. The fight is between the aggressive and the defensive factors. So when you have an imbalance between the aggressive, for example, the gastric acid and pepsin release, and the protective factors, that is the mucosal defense and repair, prostaglandins in particular, then the aggressive factors wins. You are in trouble. You are going to have the injury there. All these guys will help support the aggressive factors, H. pylori, NSAIDs, glucocorticoids, and stress. Any question? From here, we are going to speed up because the basics are clear. So all the rest that we are going to mention, it will be based on what we have discussed so far. So today we are going to finish peptic ulcer disease. Any question, class captain? Am I free to continue?
Yes, please. You can continue.
Okay, so somebody will get ulcer and it may be that extensive and complications may set in. So what are some of the common complications of peptic ulcer disease? Of course, peptic ulcer disease is a wound, so it can bleed at any time. So GI bleeding, that is upper GI bleeding, can occur. But normally, occultism, secret, you may not see the blood. The bleeding may be occult in nature, unless maybe you examine microscopically the feces of that person that you may see blood in there. So in most cases, the GIT will be bleeding from peptic ulcer disease, but it may be occult. You may also have melena, black tarry stools that comes. This means that the blood is coming from the upper GIT and that enzymes have acted upon the blood, digested the blood, and therefore the change in color from the fresh, bright red color to that tarry nature, the dark brown. Then people can even vomit blood through peptic ulceration. And if you are not lucky and you bleed extensively, you may get maybe hypovolumic shock. You may get problems with excessive anemia and death may ensue. The depth of the ulceration may be that deep that it may even lead to ulceration, perforation. And this normally has approximately 70% chance, 7% chance of happening in patients with peptic ulcer disease. So among patients who suffer from peptic ulcer disease, approximately 7% may suffer from perforations of the GIT. Some 2% of people who do get peptic ulcer disease may also suffer from obstructions. And this normally occurs as a result of repetitive, the wound is coming and continuously it will heal. So repetitive scarring and possibly edema from the inflammation that can lead to the duodenal bulb or the pyloric channel being obstructed. When the obstruction happens, these are possibly some of the signs and symptoms that the sufferer may experience. You eat something small, then you are satisfied. So early satiety, because there is obstruction there. You become bloated, you feel like vomiting, there is nausea, and truly you may vomit. And of course, since you eat something small and you are satisfied, you are not going to eat a lot, and eventually you will lose weight. So these are some of the complications that people do normally suffer. Perforations and obstructions may take you to the theater for a session. So they may have to repair it for you if you are not lucky. So let's don't joke with peptic ulcer disease. What are the general signs and symptoms? The subjective data. So the symptoms, the sufferer may feel epigastric pain. So pain that is found within the epigastric region, abdominal fullness, or at times the feeling of cramps. And normally the pattern of the pain, it's worse at night, normally. issues with heartburn. So normally you get regurgitations, acid secretions into the esophagus. Then you get heartburn. That is GERD. You belch a lot. Every now and then you are belching because you are bloated. And this may come with pain. Nausea, vomiting, and anorexia may be there. You feel nausea, you are not feeling fine, you won't get appetite to eat. Then, of course, you lose weight, and the complications that you mentioned may also set in. The bleeding, the perforation, and obstructions. Now, there are two main types of ulcer, peptic ulcer disease. It is either it happens within the gastric region or within the duodenal region, or if you're unlucky, you get both. So in terms of the cause by H. pylori, as I said, duodenal ulcers do have more relationship with H. pylori as compared to gastric. So almost about 90 to 100% in duodenal ulcers, you get H. pylori around. Gastric, relatively lower rate of H. pylori infection, 60 to 85%. In duodenal ulcers, you realize that you have hyperacid secretions, whilst in gastric ulcer, there may even be hypoacid secretion. What is the pattern of the pain? In gastric ulcers, it's immediately after meals. At times, it even goes with meals. You eat, and then since, for example, there is a sore in the stomach, the food hits, your contour hits the surface of the wound, then you suffer from the pain. But typically 1 to 2 hours after meals. So to differentiate it from the duodenum, this is how I take it. With gastric ulcer, the wound is in the stomach. When you eat, the food falls within the stomach. So take it like it hits the wound within the gastric region, then you get the pain. Hence, with gastric ulcer, the food comes with food. Whilst with duodenal ulcer, it comes way after you have eaten. So it means that when you are hungry, for example, that is when you feel duodenal peptic ulcer pain. But during meals or immediately after meals, you feel. So when you get your pain with meals or right after meals, then it is likely gastric. When you are hungry, because some meals by 2 to 4 hours time, everything is gone. It's gone from your stomach. So when you are hungry and you feel the pain, then normally it is likely duodenal. Of course, at night, you don't wake up and eat. And therefore, since this duodenal gastric pain goes without meals, then it's likely that for duodenal ulcers, the pain is likely going to happen when you are not eating. And that is nighttime when you are asleep for about 8 whole hours that you are not going to take anything. But typically 2 to 4 hours after meals. So in the nutshell, this happens with meals. This happens when you are hungry, the pain. Food aggravates the pain, of course. When you eat, you feel the pain. So you won't be happy. You are not going to eat. You feel pains when you eat. So that will lead to weight loss. This guy, when you are hungry, you are feeling the pain. So you eat more. So that you don't feel the pain. So you are going to get what? Also are likely to have weight gain. Whilst those with gastric ulcer, because the pain is aggravated by eating, they fail to eat and they lose weight. Vomiting is common here in the gastric one. Vomiting is not common here. The gastric ulcer is less likely to bleed. The duodenal one is more likely to bleed, about 4 more times as compared to the gastric one. Per epidemiological study in males, whilst the duodenal is more common in males. Again, with respect to age, the gastric ulcer happens to relatively older people, 40 to 70 years, whilst the duodenal happens to 30 to 50 years. Any question? So that's the difference. Key things, H. pylori inputs, a common question, GPPQE, more common with duodenal ulcers. The pattern of the pain and the relationship with meals. So the first 3 are the most important ones. Not saying that the others are not important, but if you can't remember all, at least the pain pattern with meals, timing, and H. pylori input. Any question? Any question? If not, we are moving straight to diagnosis. Once that we know the signs and symptoms, and we can now even use the signs and symptoms as in either gastric or peptic duodenal ulcer to differentiate. We have to zoom into proper diagnosis so that we're able to confirm the condition and treat accordingly. So now, for diagnosis, we've mentioned H. pylori here as being present in both gastric and peptic ulcer. All the two forms, you have H. pylori. So it is important that as part of the diagnosis, you test for the presence of H. pylori. So for H. pylori, we have both endoscopic tests and non-endoscopic tests. So the endoscopic test, through endoscopy, you are able to take cultures, biopsies. You take part of the GIT, the stomach or the duodenum or both. Through endoscopy, you are being guided by a certain camera. So you pass a certain tube, and when it gets to the stomach region, let's say the antrum, where we say H. pylori normally lives, you want to test for H. pylori, so you take biopsies or you take samples of that region. You go to the duodenum tube, you take biopsies from there. Then you can examine the microbiologic effects. So you do microbiologic examination of that sample that you have taken by using endoscopy, whether you are going to find any bacteria there or not. And if the bacteria is around, likely this guy may be that guy. Then you can also do culture. You culture the sample that you took or the biopsy, the structure that you took from the GIT by using the endoscopy. You culture, and if H. pylori is around, because it is normally the only guy that can survive in this harsh acidic environment, it is likely that it will be H. pylori that will grow when you do culture and sensitivity. Then the biopsy that you stain, we have the whole principle is based on the urease enzyme. So we have this test called a Campylobacter-like test. Campylobacter-like test. H. pylori was previously called Campylobacter pylori. H. pylori was previously called Campylobacter pylori. And therefore, those Campylobacter bacteria, for example, the H. pylori, is the type that can release urease. Campylobacter is the only bacteria that releases urease. Remember, we have discussed that. So when you take biopsies from, say, the antrum, then you can test for the presence of the products of the breakdown of urea. Because if urea is broken down to ammonia and carbon dioxide, then it means urease is around. And where would urease come from? Urease will come from H. pylori. So by detecting the end product of urea breakdown, it means that urease was around. That catalyzed the breakdown of the urea. And therefore, urease, if it is around, then we can only implicate H. pylori. This will confirm that then H. pylori is there. And that gives a positive test. So when you take samples from, say, the antrum of the stomach, then you generate ammonia because there is what? Urease in there. So what you do is that if you bring the sample from there, then you add the reagent to it. So the reagent, as in the sample comes in, and then you add it, then you get a breakdown. You bring the sample from the stomach, for example. So the reagent will be prepared with ammonia. So the reagent that you are going to use to test, you buy it from a manufacturer. it contains urea. So by bringing the sample from the stomach, if H. pylori is there, then it is likely that your biopsy will also contain urease. So the biopsy that you have taken, if H. pylori is there, then it means you may have the urease enzyme as part of the biopsy. Then you buy your reagent or your test kit from the manufacturer that would contain urea. So when you put your sample on the test kit that contains urea, if truly H. pylori is there and that the urease enzyme is also there, then the urease enzyme will break the urea, which has been incorporated into the test kit, into ammonia and carbon dioxide. And when the ammonia is generated from this test, you will have a color change from the original yellow to purple color. And this shows that the test is positive for the presence of urease. I take it again. You have H. pylori living in the stomach or the duodenum. We are saying that H. pylori is capable of producing and releasing urease as a means of protecting itself from the harsh acidic environment. And we are going to utilize this to test for the presence of H. pylori. So what you do is that through endoscopy, you take biopsies from the antrum, for example. Then you get a test kit or a reagent from a manufacturer that contains urea. If you add the reagent to your biopsy, and then you get the release of ammonia, then it means that urease is there. It's part of the biopsy. And if urease is there, who produced the urease? H. pylori. So if, in fact, urease is there, it will break down the urea that has been incorporated into the reagent or the test kit. Ammonia will be released. Once ammonia is released, there will be a color change from the yellow color of that will be the original color of your reagent or the test kit to a purple color. And this shows that ammonia has been produced. If ammonia has been produced, the test kit contains urea. So it means that something has had an ammonia, and that is possibly urease. Who brings the urease? H. pylori. And this will confirm the presence of H. pylori. You can also use non-endoscopic tests. So, for example, you can detect for antibodies against H. pylori in your blood. The more common mechanism or the common test that we do is the carbon-13 urea breath test, which is also based on the principle of the urease test. So you exclude the carbon dioxide that will come from the breakdown of the urea, and then it is labeled. So it is labeled is a labeled carbon. So the machine will detect it, and then so the urea that will be used in this test, the carbon dioxide in there will have the carbon that is labeled. So when you bring in your breath and then the urease comes out and it's able to break that labeled carbon in the urea down, then the labeled carbon that will come out will be detected. Then we say that you have tested positive for the carbon-13 urea breath test. So remember, over here we are utilizing the ammonia in the clothes test, but over here we are using the carbon dioxide. So the carbon dioxide, the carbon within the urea will be labeled. So a labeled carbon urea is used, and the moment you breathe out, the carbon that will come out will have the labeled carbon in there, and that shows that there is urease there. You can also do stool analysis. So you try to detect antigens from H. pylori that are present in the stool. So when this happens, then it shows that H. pylori is there. Are you okay with the H. pylori detection test? But focus on urea breath test. If you have any question here, you can please ask. So we have the cloth test, invasive. Normally, we don't do it. In practice, normally, it is the carbon 13 urea breath test. You want easy stuff nowadays, so we don't want to do invasive techniques where you have to go in there and pick biopsies for these tests. But at times, you may have to do it. But the carbon 13 urea breath test, that is non-invasive, can be used. You can detect antigens and antibodies. All of them can help predict the presence of H. pylori or not, then you treat. Then you can also do imaging, or of course, the endoscopy itself. And with this, you can actually see the wound in the stomach or the duodenum to confirm the presence of the ulcer itself. Here, we are looking at being able to detect this agent, H. pylori, as the possible cause. With this, you are actually confirming the presence of the problem itself. That is septic ulcer. So through endoscopy or other imaging techniques, you can see the ulcer yourself. You pass the tube under sedation, and there's a camera in there that can record everything onto a screen, and that can even, you can get a printout from it. So normally, the endoscopy is, in case you want to visualize, it is the choice. People will go and then under sedation, they pass the tube through them and then they visualize the ulcer themselves. But normally, you reserve it for complicated ones. If the signs and symptoms are not that serious, it's not necessary for you to put the patient through stress by passing the tube in there. But if you are having complicated signs, complications, then of course, you don't have any option than to do endoscopy to confirm and then treat accordingly. Any question? Any question? All right. So treatment.
Please, can you go over the urea breath test and then the antigen side again? Thank you.
Okay. So the urea breath test, the kind of the urea that they use will be the one that is synthetic. So they actually label the calcium. They give it a marker so that when this type of, you know the structure of urea. Urea is made up of one carbon. If you react one carbon dioxide with 2 ammonia, then you are going to get urea. So the central carbon, you attach 2 amino groups, then 1 oxygen. So that is urea. So the carbon, the central carbon that is in there with this test will be marked. It will be labeled. So you give it to the person, and then you give the machine to the person, that the person will brief out. Because you want, if the urease is in there, when the person swallows this kind of urea, the urease will act on the urea and break it down to carbon dioxide and ammonia. Carbon dioxide is a gas. So when the person breathes out into the machine, the carbon dioxide that will come out will actually have the carbon that was labeled. And the urease, since it was there and it has broken the urea down into the carbon dioxide that will contain the labeled calcium, carbon, and then the ammonia, you'll be able to detect that labeled carbon. And that confirms that H. pylori is in there producing urease. And that urease has been able to break down the swallowed urea that contained a certain carbon that was labeled, that was marked. So when this carbon dioxide comes out and it contains the labeled carbon, then it means that it is only urease in the GIT that can break down your labeled carbon urea that the person swallowed. And therefore, if the carbon dioxide is coming out, then it was urease. If urease was there and it catalyzed the breakdown of this urea that contained the labeled carbon, then it means H. pylori is also there. Are you okay with the urea breath test?
Yes, please.
All right. Then there's 2 antigen tests. Once you have the infection comes, the bacteria comes with its own proteins. One of those proteins is the antigen. It's just like when you have hepatitis B. Then you go and test for hepatitis B surface antigen. The virus comes in with that antigen. H. pylori 2 will come in with its own antigen. It is part of the H. pylori. So if you have the infection, you take the person's stool and you detect the antigen. You run it and you get this bluish coloration. It means that the H. pylori antigen is there. If the H. pylori antigen is within your stool, then it means you have the H. pylori in your body. So it confirms the infection. Are you okay?
Yes,
Hello?
please.
All right.
Hi.
Any other question? Okay. So endoscopy, you reserve it for more complicated ones. If it's not complicated, then you can do imaging. Either you use contrast enhanced imaging, you let the person take some contrast media, and the contrast is such that if you have any wound in there, it will paint those areas that you have ulcers. You take your image, X-ray, then you see where the contrast has painted, has marked. It means that you have sores there. But if you are having complications, then you have to go in there and visualize the sores yourself. Where actually are the stores? The endoscopy, you'll be able to detect the depth of the sores. You may see how dangerous the thing is. Any other complications like obstructions and perforations, the endoscopy will help you to identify. Then you manage accordingly. Treatment. We have general treatment goals for ulcer. And of course, depending on the etiology, you may also have additional goals. So for example, if you have an NSAID-induced ulcer versus H. pylori-induced ulcer, the additional goal of the H. pylori-induced ulcer is to use antibiotics. But in the NSAID-induced ulcer, the goals will not be to eradicate any organism because you don't have any infection. But with H. pylori, you realize that one of the goals will be the need to eradicate the organism. So we have general goals and specific goals. So the treatment depends on the etiology, of course. The way you manage stress, H. pylori and NSAID-induced ulcers may be similar but not the same. As I cited, in H. pylori, you are going to add an antibiotic. With NSAIDs and stress, you are not going to add an antibiotic. Is the peptic ulcer just the first time that you are getting it? Or it has been chronic, recurrent, it goes and comes back? You have to take that one into consideration. Then do you have complications or not? So in treating peptic ulcer, it depends on all these. The etiology, whether it is the first time or a chronic issue, the presence or absence of complication. But overall, regardless of the etiology, these are the main targets that you have to achieve. Of course, you have to relieve the ulcer pain and to heal the ulcer itself. If the wound is not healed, the pain will always be there. Try and then prevent recurrent episodes. And also try and reduce the occurrence of complications. And if the complications are there, manage. So these are general, regardless of the cause of the peptic ulcer. Then you may have additional goals to what? Attend to. So for example, the target, and of course, heal the ulcer, cure the wound, pain management, as in all these, you have to look at them. If you are successful in eradicating the H. pylori, this will help to reduce the recurrence rate to less than 10% within a year. It means that being able to eradicate the H. pylori is very, very important, because if it is there, you are not able to eradicate it, you still have some traces. In no time, they will proliferate, multiply in numbers, and cause the ulcer again. But if you're able to clear them, everything, then likely you are going to have this less than 10% recurrence. So H. pylori clearance is very, very important when it is H. pylori induced. Non-pharmacological strategies. Non-pharmacological strategies. We said stress can give you ulcer through excessive cortisol release. So try and reduce stress. If possible, eliminate stress. If you smoke, cease smoking. Remember, cigarette contains nicotine. It can cause reduced prostaglandin synthesis, reduce mucosal blood flow, bile acid regurgitation. So cease smoking. It's not reduce. Stop smoking. Reduce alcohol. Stop smoking. Avoid the use of non-selective NSAIDs. If there is any COX-2 selectives, celecoxib as an example. Remember, aspirin does the same thing as NSAIDs. We implicated food. So food substances and then beverages that can cause dyspepsia. This is one of the signs and symptoms of ulcer, or even exacerbate the other symptoms of ulcer. For example, spicy foods, caffeine, energy drinks. You are taking a Samojan, blue jeans. You are addicted to caffeine. You are addicted to alcohol. Please try to avoid it. If you can't avoid it, especially this one that people at times they can't do away with, please reduce it. Reduce it. In cases where there are complications and the person is bleeding or having perforations or obstructions, then the non-pharmacological intervention will be surgery. So these are lifestyle modifications and surgery. These are the targets when it comes to non-pharmacological approach. How about pharmacological approach? Remember, always, whether you bring in drugs or not, the non-pharmacological approach, you have to do them. Don't say that you are now going to take drugs, so you are not going to smoke because the drugs can protect you. No. You are going to drink excessively because omeprazole is here. It can protect you. It's just like you saying that you are now on highly active antiretroviral therapy. So you are just going to fire around. No. Do this and augment the non-pharmacological treatment with pharmacological treatment. Always observe non-pharmacological strategies, but augment the non-pharmacological strategies with pharmacological strategies if the need arises that you are to use drugs in addition to lifestyle modifications. Now, pharmacological considerations. The major functional target, of course, it will be the parietal cells, because that is where you have all the receptors, all the mechanisms, TPAs, you get acid release. So the main target will be, for example, the histaminergic A2 receptor and the hydrogen potassium ATPs. So you try to find drugs that can block this receptor in particular and the main final pathway. To a lesser extent, which we normally don't do, is to antagonize the M3 receptor. We have pyrazipine for that. Though selectively it blocks the M3 receptor, it doesn't cause much as in typical antimuscarinic side effects like dry mouth, constipation, and those things. But it may cause significant side effects. For all you know, you never know. It may misbehave and give you those problems. So the M3 receptor is not a major target when it comes to current treatment of peptic ulcer disease, but rather the histaminergic H2 receptor and the hydrogen potassium ATPs. And therefore, what are the medicines, the classifications? We use the proton pump inhibitors, A2 receptor antagonists, and currently the potassium competitive acid blockers. Not found in Ghana, but areas like Japan, it's even first line there, together with antibiotics as part of the triple therapy. So this one is on you. You are a pharmacologist. I did pharmacology some long ago. So what can you say in terms of pharmacology? If I say pharmacology and I'm looking at the mechanism of action, I'm looking at possibly metabolic pathways, I'm looking at possibly side effects, at least when it comes to PPIs, A2 receptor antagonists. This one, I'll forgive you because when I send you the Word document, you'll find it in there. But these two, you know them inside out. So, class captain, please appoint somebody for that person to take us through PPIs on mechanism of action. And not only mechanism of action, no, kinetics, mainly metabolism. PPIs, remember, they are prodrugs, so you have to tell us about the activation. So mechanism of action, metabolism that will lead to activation and elimination, half-life, something, advantages, disadvantages, side effects and stuff. Then a little stuff on A2 receptor antagonist. So, class captain, give me one person.
Okay,
Or you do it yourself. Hello?
Stanley Atta, can you please help us?
The class captain. Vice Stanley.
Hello, Stanley.
Stanley, you've been mentioning. So tell us something. PPIs, mechanism of action, metabolism that leads to activation, and after they've done their work, elimination, predicted half-life, advantages over other drugs that are used in the management of peptic ulcer, and disadvantages too.
Okay. So with the mechanism of action, I know that it irreversibly binds to the hydrogen potassium ATPase. So it's going to prevent the release of hydrogen ions, that's hydrochloric acid, into the gastric lumen. With activation, I'm not really sure of that. So that's what I would say.
Okay, very good, very good. You've tried. So it is true. As for the mechanism, it blocks through covalent bonding an enzyme called the hydrogen potassium ATPase. That is the main mechanism. So that proton pump is where you have the acid being ejected. So if you block it, then it can't do that acid release. But how do they do it? As I said, PPIs are prodrugs. So when you take them, be it omeprazole, esomeprazole, whatever, these are prodrugs, and the form that you take is not the form that they are going to use to work. So what happens is that the PPIs are basics. They are basic agents. They are alkaline in nature. The structure is said that they are basics. So they need to be activated so that they can work. Normally, if you have to check the pKs of PPIs, it's around 4 and 5. 4 and 5. The pK of PPIs are around 4 and 5. In the body, the only place that is highly acidic and that the pH is normally below 4 or even around 1.5 is around where the parietal cells are, because they are the cells that release the acid. So that immediate surroundings, of course, you expect that the acidity will be very, very high. And looking at the pK of these basic PPIs, it means that the only region within the body that they prefer going is around agents are attracted by acidic reagents. So in the body, when you take PPIs, they get absorbed. Because of the low pH, as against the pK of PPIs, between 4 and 5, where they are likely to go and then exert their effect is, by all means, around the parietal cells, where you have high acidity. So in fact, when you take PPIs right after 30 minutes to 1 hour, if you have to check the concentration within the plasma, normally it is 4 times lesser than the amount that will accumulate around the parietal cells, because the acidity around the parietal cells attracts the PPIs more than even the blood. So the concentration around the parietal cells are like 4 times more than the amount within the blood. Now, before you can activate this product, you need acid. And of course, where they like accumulating, you have a lot of acid. So in the presence of the acid, these PPIs are protonated and they are converted to sulfonamides. So cationic sulfonamides or cationic tetracyclic sulfonamic acids. So the protonation, because where they want to accumulate, you have a lot of acid there. So when they get there, then the acid there will protonate these PPIs. The protonation is what leads to the activation. So once they get protonated, they are converted to initially the cationic tetracyclic sulfonamic acids. And then they can also rearrange and become cationic sulfonamides. So these are the active forms of the PPIs. They are attracted more to regions around the parietal cells where you have excessive acidity because of their chemical nature being basic with the pK around 4 and 5. They are attracted there with a concentration there even 4 times more than what you have in the plasma. Lucky for us, where they are, you have a lot of acid that is needed to activate these prodrugs. So the prodrugs are protonated and are converted to cationic sulfonamides or cationic tetracyclic sulfonamide form. Then they can attack the enzyme, and through covalent bonding, they form disulfide linkages with the cysteine residues of the enzyme and block the enzyme altogether. Clinically almost irreversible blockade. So further proton pump means that the parietal cell will need to produce additional proton pumps before it can release, because the one that is there will be blocked. So further acid release is based on further proton pump production that will not be blocked before the parietal cell can release again. So that is how the drugs are metabolized for activation. And when they are activated, they block the enzyme. They block it through covalent bonding. The sulfonamic forms disulfide linkages with the cysteine residues of the proton pump. And this leads to the blockade of the enzyme. What happens is that the release is blocked. Clinically, it is irreversible. So further acid release depends on further proton pump production that will not be blocked. Are we okay? Are we okay? Or should I take it again? Anybody with any issue with the mechanism of activation and the mechanism of blockade proper? I take it for one last time. These proton pump inhibitors are basics. They are basic in nature and their pK is around 4 to 5. Looking at this basic nature in the pK, it means that they will preferably accumulate in acidic environments in the body. And in the body, the only region that is highly acidic enough is around the parietal cells. So it's not surprising that when PPIs are taken and they are absorbed into the systemic circulation, after 30 minutes to 1 hour, you realize that the concentration around the parietal cells is 4 times more than the concentration within the blood. And over there, when they accumulate in numbers, they are protonated by the acid and they become the active forms, either the cationic tetracyclic sulfonamic acid or the cationic sulfonamides. In this active state, they can form disulfide bonds with the cysteine residue hydrogen potassium ATPase. So it is made up of chain of amino acids, peptides, of which cysteine is one of them. So the active forms will form a disulfide linkage with the cysteine residues of the peptide. The enzyme is a peptide. So it contains amino acids connected to each other. One of them is cysteine. The drugs will form bonds with the cysteine residues, disulfide linkages that is covalently bonded. This is clinically irreversible, and for that matter, the blockade of acid secretion is clinically irreversible. So if this parietal cell want to secrete further acids, then it will not be this proton pump. There should be what? Newer proton pumps that hasn't been blocked by the what? Drugs. It is only through this mechanism that additional acid release can occur. The half-life of proton pump inhibitors are not that long, approximately 30 minutes. 30 minutes, and the half-life will be reached. This is very important. This is very important because normally you say that, oh, take it 30 minutes before meals. Is that not what you say, class captain? Or you say a different thing?
That's what they say.
Okay. So that is what we say. Both the half-life and the peak plasma concentration of PPIs, and in fact, the peak time that you have a lot of the drug around the proton pump is around 30 minutes. Now, if you eat, it stimulates the secretion of acids. So meals, when you are eating, all the 3 pathways of acid secretions are stimulated by food. All the 3 pathways of the acid secretion are stimulated by food. But when you take the drug, it will have to be absorbed into the bloodstream. And it will take about roughly 30 minutes for the drug to get to where the proton pump is. So you take the drug 30 minutes before meals, so that by the time it gets to the proton pump area, that is roughly 30 minutes. So you have taken the drug 30 minutes. So that is the time that you are also going to take your meal. So at that same time, all the 3 pathways of acid secretion would have been activated by your meal. That has been taken 30 minutes after the drug on the proton pump. It will go there and meet enough acids for the protonation to occur. I take it again. You take the drug 30 minutes before meals. So by 30 minutes time, you will have higher amount of the drug that will move from the blood into the areas around the parietal cells, the acidic areas. So by 30 minutes time that you are getting enough concentrations there, that is the same time that you are taking your meal. And your meal is going to cause activation of all the 3 pathways for acid secretion. So it will tally with the time that you have enough of the proton pump there. Will always synchronize with your meal-induced acid secretion, so that you have enough acid just around that 30 minutes to be able to protonate drug 30 minutes before. By that 30 minutes time, you have a lot of it around the parietal cells. And that time when you eat, your meal will activate excessive acid production by what? Stimulating all the three pathways. So the acid will meet the proton pumps in high amount, then the protonation will occur, and then it will allow the drugs to work. Now, we say that proton pump inhibitors are superior to, say, the H2 receptor antagonists for obvious reason. We have three pathways. You block only one pathway, H2 receptor antagonist, which means the other two pathways can work to still secrete acid. But me, proton pump inhibitor, I block the final pathway through which all the three will pass through. So if I do my work, I'm blocking all the three as a proton pump inhibitor. If you do your job, you are blocking only one pathway, and the two pathways can still cause acid secretion. So again, it is not surprising that when you look at the intragastric pH, PPIs have better control of intragastric pH than H2 receptor antagonists. And therefore, we say that the intragastric pH control of PPIs are superior to H2 receptor antagonists. Are we okay? Are we okay? Class captain.
Yes, please.
Okay. In addition to this, within the class itself, you realize that some members are better than others within the PPI class itself. As a class, they've beaten the H2 receptor antagonists, basa. But within the class too, there are masters. For example, omeprazole comes in the form of racemic mixtures. It's a racemate where you have R and S isomers. These PPIs are principally metabolized by the cytochrome C19 and the 3A4 subtypes. I'm talking a lot of pharmacokinetics today, but forgive me. These are metabolized by the cytochrome C19, the principal enzyme there that metabolizes the PPIs, and to a lesser extent, the 3A4 subtype. Omeprazole comes in racemate, S and R. Per the metabolism by the C19, the S isomer is resistant. It's less sensitive. I won't say it's resistant. It's less sensitive. So it is not easily cleared from the body. The S isomer is not easily cleared from the body. And therefore, it will have what? A more powerful effect as compared to the R isomer, or when you take a mixture of the two, 50-50. And this S isomer is what we refer to as esomeprazole. Esomeprazole. So it is also not surprising that esomeprazole is more effective than omeprazole. It stays because it is less metabolized, and it gives what? An extended and potent intragastric pH control. We also have dextra or R, how do you call it? Is it lansoprazole? That one too is less sensitive. The R lansoprazole is also less sensitive to the C19, the 2C19 enzyme, and therefore it also has better effect as compared to the others. So when you take omeprazole, normally is a mixture of R and S, 50% R, 50% S. It means you are taking just, if you take 20 milligram, then you are taking, say, 10 milligram of the S that is more potent. If I take esomeprazole 20 milligram, all the 20 milligram will be S. And therefore, I'll have more of the S in my 20 milligram. So in case I take esomeprazole, as compared to you, that in your 20 milligram omeprazole, only 10 is S and 10 is R. So mean that I'm taking 20 milligram S and S is said to have advantages in terms of lower metabolism, I'm going to have a better response as compared to you. So when you take Nexium, you get better response than taking omeprazole. Side effects includes headache, vomiting, nausea, diarrhea, constipation, skin reactions. These are
Hello.
side. Yeah, hello.
Yes, sir. Sir, please, what did you say about the lansoprazole? I didn't really hear it.
So there is R for Richard, R lansoprazole. That one too is less sensitive to the 2C19. So it shares similarities with the S omeprazole. So it is also a very good agent. Are you okay? Hello?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right. So side effects in general, you have headache, you have diarrhea, you have constipation, you have skin reactions, dizziness. These ones, they are common. But clinically, these normally would not happen. Even if it will happen, it will not be normally to the extent that you have to stop. H2 receptor antagonist mechanism. Obviously, they block the H2 receptor. They block the H2 receptor. If you block the H2 receptor, then you are not going to translocate the proton pump even to the boundary, as into the cell membrane for hydrogen to pass through. So it means the ATPase remains cytoplasmic, and that can cause the blockade. But remember that before you took the drug, you did not block the receptors. So you already have certain proton pumps lining up on the membrane, and those ones will work. So it is from at the point where you took the drug that you are going to block further translocation. So it means before the drug, those that had been transported to the membrane, they can still release the acid via the remaining two pathways. I hope you get the scenario, because today you haven't taken your H2 receptor antagonist. So the histamine can act on it and cause translocation of the ATPase to the membrane. If tomorrow you take it, then further translocation will not occur. But the one that was transported today, it is there. So though you have blocked the H2 pathway, and utilize the ones that were transported yesterday. And this makes H2 receptor antagonists less sensitive. Then the newer agents, potassium competitive acid blockers. An example is vonoprazan. So the entry of potassium that exchanges for hydrogen will now competitively be blocked by these drugs, so that potassium will not enter for the acid to be released. These agents are comparable to the PPIs. And even in Japan, from the Japanese Society of Gastroenterology, they are saying that this class, even to some extent, works better than the PPIs. So they prefer a triple therapy that contains vonoprazan to esomeprazole or omeprazole. They are comparable, but they think that this class even do have better advantages in that they have a quicker onset of action as compared to the PPIs. So the PPIs, they will have to block the enzymes, and it takes time to block it. Normally, the steady state, you get to steady state around 3 days when you are taking PPIs. So before you can adequately block substantial amount of the enzymes. This class, they don't block the enzymes. So immediately when you take them, they are just antagonizing potassium. And therefore, their effect is felt far earlier than this. In terms of efficacy, they are comparable. But in terms of onset of action, this class, they are superior to PPIs. So in Japan, they prefer vonoprazan to the PPIs as first line, but alternative first line there is PPIs. In Ghana, we are still using the PPI as part of the first line. Any question on this? We will finish very soon. The rest are just statements. It doesn't need much explanation. Okay, Class Captain. So now, first line, especially in Ghana. So if it is H. pylori induced, then the target is to use the triple therapy regimen. What is this triple therapy regimen? This contains an anti-secretory agent, for example, PPI, in combination with 2 antibiotics that are active against H. pylori. So normally in Ghana, the normal trend is we have 3 antibiotics: amoxicillin, metronidazole, and clarithromycin. Depending on the sensitivity pattern and the type of patient you are dealing with, you choose 2 from these 3 antibiotics: metronidazole, clarithromycin, amoxicillin. Then you add a PPI. Why are you using these 2 agents, PPI and antibiotics? You see, antibiotics are able to kill bacteria effectively when the bacteria are actively dividing. When the bacteria is dormant, when the bacteria is resting, it gives itself some protective mechanisms, at times some coating, at times biofilms, so that antibiotics find it very difficult to penetrate and kill them. But when they are actively dividing, that is normally when they are more vulnerable to antibacterial effects. So what do? We are giving the PPI to reduce the acidity of the GIT and the duodenum. This will provide a conducive environment for H. pylori. With this, it will begin to multiply. And this is the time that our antibiotics will be most active against the agent. So when we provide a conducive environment by increasing the pH with the PPI, this guy will take advantage and begin to multiply, not knowing that it is around that time that it is also most vulnerable to antibacterial agents. So at that time, then the antibacterial agents will effectively destroy it. So it's as if we are helping it, but we actually want to create some means to destroy it. Hence, the strategy of the triple therapy. The PPI to enhance proliferation of the bacteria where it becomes vulnerable, then the antibiotics will pounce on it. Nowadays, because we have a lot of resistance, there are additional antibacterial agents that we use as alternate first lines or second line rescue agents, the fluoroquinolones and then the bismuth agent. We will look at that very soon. So typical of the Ghanaian standard, first line include PPIs plus the 2 antibiotics that you take for preferably 10 to 14 days. Never in your life should you do less than 7 days. The minimum should be for 10 days, preferably 14 days. So in case you take this and maybe the healing is not up to the level that you want, and of course you may want to do a second course, then you are going to do the PPI treatment by here with different antibiotics that you use, because it means that the first one, there was some problem. That is why you did not get what you wanted. So of course, you wouldn't go with the same combination. So you take the PPI, then you take different antibiotics that wasn't packed. Or you do the 4 regimen bismuth base therapy. So you do a PPI, then 3 antibacterial agents. One will be bismuth, metronidazole, and preferably tetracycline. So in case you do your first time treatment and the healing wasn't good, You can decide to do the same triple therapy, but here you change the antibiotics. Or you do the bismuth 4-drug regimen, the bismuth-based 4-drug regimen, containing bismuth, metro, tetra, and the PPI. As I said, in Japan, they prefer vonoprazan, which is the potassium inhibitor, together with amoxicillin and clarithromycin. In fact, I must state that in Ghana, the best shot, all things being equal, if there are no resistance and what have you, the best combination triple therapy is using esomeprazole, clarithromycin, and amoxicillin. So you use esomeprazole 20 BD, amoxicillin 1 gram BD, clarithromycin 500. So they call it PAC subscript 500. The PAC 500 regimen. All things being equal, if there are no resistance, is the best in terms of efficacy and safety. PAC in capitals subscript 500. So the P stands for the PPI, that is esomeprazole. The A stands for amoxicillin 1 gram. Then the C500 stands for clarithromycin 500 milligram. So Amox 1 gram, clarithromycin 500, the esomeprazole 20, or BD, 4, 10 to 14 days. Vonoprazan, if it comes to Ghana, would be another good choice for us. After the treatment, you may want to do maintenance therapy to make sure that the signs and symptoms, if they are there, then you control. It is not advisable to go and confirm the clearance of H. pylori after the triple therapy. Once from culture and sensitivity tests, your antibiotics are okay, you do the triple therapy and the regimen works, signs and symptoms are good, you don't need to go back and test for the presence of the H. pylori again as a confirmation of eradication. You don't need to do that. It's just a waste of cash. But at times, if still the signs and symptoms, belching and those things are there, you may take an extended doses of PPIs or H2 receptor antagonists, especially in cases where we have high risks for complications. And as I said, when the patient feels eradication, or in cases where it is H. pylori negative ulcers and you are still feeling signs and symptoms, you may have to continue your PPIs at times for about 4 weeks or even 8 weeks, depending on how the signs and symptoms will subside. How about if it is NSAIDs induced? If it is NSAIDs induced, how do you know that it is NSAIDs induced, and for that matter, H. pylori is not around? So you have to still test for the presence of H. pylori. If it is positive, do what we have discussed. If it is negative and it is possible to discontinue the NSAIDs, then stop taking the NSAIDs and then initiate either your PPI, H2 receptor antagonist, or sucralfate. Sucralfate works just like mucus. After taking it, it forms a complex and forms a raft that protects the lining of the GIT. So if you confirm that with this type of peptic ulcer, there is no H. pylori, the person has been on NSAID therapy, then it means that likely it is what? NSAID. If it is possible to discontinue, stop and treat. If it's not possible to discontinue, then you may have to change the NSAID or reduce the dose. So you change the NSAID if it is the non-selective one to the selective one, celecoxib, or reduce the dose and add a PPI to it. So that is how you do it. If it is possible to stop it and then initiate the anti-secretory agent. If it's not possible to stop, maybe the person is in pain, maybe some arthritis or something that the person needs, let's say gouty arthritis, that a person, like by all means, must take NSAIDs, then you have to reduce the dose or change it to the selective COX-2 inhibitor and add a PPI. You may also do a prophylactic, could have Attakorah that contains misoprostol and diclofenac. So you do NSAID therapy. You anticipate that you are going to do a long-term NSAID therapy at high doses. Then you don't wait for the NSAIDs at this high dose to cause a problem. You initiate by doing cytoprotection. What is cytoprotection? By adding a PPI, misoprostol, or misoprostol to the NSAID for longer duration, high dose. Or as I said, you switch to a COX-2 selective inhibitor. Even with this, it is advisable to at times still add a PPI or misoprostol as cytoprotective mechanism. This is the algorithm. You can go through this. It's the same thing as all the way from signs and symptoms to confirmation to the treatment. So we don't need to go through this anymore. And these are a few regimens for first line triple therapy recommendations. So for example, you can see esomeprazole here. So this is the pack 500, 20 milligram BD, Amox 1 gram BD, clarithromycin 500 milligram BD. You are just taking it on BD basis throughout. So it's flexible than, for example, when you add maybe metronidazole that you are going to take for TID 3 times a day as compared to, and then combining clarithromycin and metronidazole, you'll be in trouble. The GI side effect, the metabolic, the metallic taste, and all these nausea and vomiting from these two drugs, if you combine them, it's worse. Compliance will be a problem. It is more easier when you are taking either this or that against Amox and clarithromycin against Amox. Flexible dosing BD is preferred. Any question? So key issues to consider when somebody is taking some of these anti-ulcer medicines. You have to think about the interactions of PPIs, for example, omeprazole versus clopidogrel. So clopidogrel can block the 2C19 enzyme. So an interaction of that sort can happen. Taking PPIs on empty stomach, that is 30 minutes before meals, we've explained that. As omeprazole being superior to omeprazole, we've explained that is a racemate containing both R and S isomer. The S isomer is less sensitive to the 2C19 enzyme, and therefore it accumulates and works more. It gives better efficacy. This is the S isomer. 20 milligram of this will have 20 milligram S isomer. 20 milligram of this will have 10 milligram S isomer and 10 milligram R isomer. So ideally, it will give what? Half of the effect that the SO will give. A2 receptor antagonists have been found to be very, very effective when it comes to nighttime basal acid secretion. So people who get symptoms, excessive pain at night, you may consider giving them A2 receptor antagonists to control nighttime acid secretion. But unfortunately, if at times we see some prescriptions that the doctors will give both A2 receptor antagonists and PPI at the same time, don't rush and say that it's a care issue. Because of this reason, the nighttime basal acid control of A2 receptor antagonists, if somebody is on PPIs and still finds problem during nighttime, a clinician may decide to add an A2 receptor antagonist for nighttime acid control. And for that matter, you may see both, say, cimetidine and omeprazole on the same prescription. It may not be a mistake. Maybe the clinician wants to have better control of nighttime. But if you do this for a very long time, you don't get enough benefits. So it is just for a short time control. Then We normally also give antacids to try and then neutralize the excessive acid in addition to the triple therapy. And of course, certain individuals who have congestive issues already, heart failure, liver, kidney, if you give antacids, most of them will have excessive content of sodium. And you know sodium issue with these congestive issues. And therefore, these individuals, it is advised that you give them the antacids with low sodium content. And when do we say that an antacid is a low sodium content antacid? When do we say that? It is when, if it's a tablet, one tablet has not more than 1 millimole of sodium. The sodium content of one tablet is not more than 1 millimole. If it's liquid preparation, then we say that 10 mils of the liquid preparation doesn't contain more than 1 millimole of sodium. And since these two have lower content of sodium, it can be given to people that we fear that if you give in more sodium, it may worsen their edema. Remember, the antacids, some of them will contain magnesium, aluminum, calcium. Magnesium containing ones will give you diarrhea. Aluminum containing ones will give you constipation. This guy, as we discussed, will give you rib-bound acid secretion. If you want to cancel out the constipation of this versus the diarrhea of this, then you can give in one preparation a combination that contains both the magnesium antacid and the aluminum antacid, so that the two will cancel out their effects. So normally you will see antacids, no gel. What have you? You check the formula and you have magnesium there. You have aluminum containing antacid also there. Both are antacids, so why not one? Our target is to neutralize the acidity, not to cause constipation or diarrhea. So by giving these two, then we have what? Cancellation of their effect. That is a pharmacokinetic interactions. We take advantage of that effect. Okay, so note that, yes, you have to note the common side effect of all these agents. Sucralfate, I said, it works just like the mucus. So it forms the barrier that protects the mucosa. So in one combination, you may have sucralfate, you have two antacids, magnesium, aluminum. Then at times they even add simethicone, anti-foaming agent, so that the accumulated gas that you have in there, it will blast all of them. Then you don't get bloated. So typical of the antacids that we have in Ghana, you see the formula, two antacids, magnesium containing, aluminum containing. Then you see some sucralfate that's supposed to go and then form something like a mucus complex to protect the GIT, and an anti-foaming agent, simethicone. So it's like 4-in-1 preparation that we normally see. Any questions so far? We are almost there. So I know it's time. We spend like 20 minutes more than the time, but we'll finish very soon. Class captain, any questions so far? Should I continue?
Yes, please.
All right. So you also have, okay.
The cimetidine omeprazole combination that you were talking about that is given for short term, what's your definition for the short term? That means how long?
Maximum 2 weeks you should stop, because above 2 weeks you don't get the additional benefit that you want to get. Are you okay?
Yes, sir.
Hello?
Thank you.
All right. So there is an alternate first line. The first line we've been talking about PPI-based regimen somewhere in Japan, vonoprazine-based regimen they prefer. We also have an alternate first line. In Ghana, if the PPI-based regimen doesn't work, then we have an alternate first line. This is the sequential therapy. So if maybe you don't want to do the normal thing, you can do the sequential therapy. And you first do a dual therapy of a PPI plus amoxicillin, both BD for first 5 days. After which, you come back to a triple therapy. By this time, a PPI, Clitro, and tenidazole, all BD for 5 days. So in total, you'll be doing 10 days. So this is what we refer to as the sequential therapy. It's an alternate first-line therapy, an alternate to our normal PPI-based regimen that we know. So this is also available if you don't want to do the normal one that we do. Then, should in case your first lines, either the sequential or the normal one, they fail, then you may have to do the second line rescue. You want to rescue the patient because the normal has failed. And this is the bismuth-based 4-drug therapy that I was talking about. It consists of an acid suppressant, that is a PPI on BD basis, then the bismuth containing salt, this on QID, then metronidazole, either 250 to 500. Over here, you will do 400. Also on QID, then you add any of these. So PPI plus bismuth plus metronidazole plus any of these 3. That will be for the second line rescue therapy. It means your first line has failed. Probably the H. pylori is resistant to your first line antibiotics, and now you want to go hard. You want to kill it. So you do a 4-drug regimen. But obviously, you see that it's not easy when it comes to adherence. Taking 4 drugs, some of them every 6 hours, it won't be easy. But that is the way to go because the normal has failed. What do you do? Then you also have another second line rescue agent, by this time the fluoroquinolone base. So you have the bismuth base second line rescue and the fluoroquinolone base second line rescue. All of these depends on the susceptibility pattern. So if you check and maybe there is resistance against fluoroquinolone, then obviously you are going by us, since this is easier. As compared to this regimen, then you can go plus fluoroquinolone, preferably levofloxacin. We have lesser resistance, especially in Ghana, as compared to Cipro. So levo works better than Cipro in Ghana. Then Amox. So you are using 3 drugs, say esomeprazole, the fluoroquinolone, and amoxicillin. So this is the second line fluoroquinolone-based rescue therapy. If this second line rescue therapy also failed, then you are going to your 3rd line therapy. And of course, with this, you have to do susceptibility testing before you initiate your 3rd line agent. So that is where the gastroenterologist will have to come in and do some cocktail combinations. So in that case, you'll be considering all possibilities. So aside the normal clarithromycin and levofloxacin that we know, rifabutin is also known to be active against H. pylori. It may be possible that you do rifabutin as part of the 3rd line. Remember, the rifamycins do have a lot of issues with interactions. So it's not surprising that we are keeping it till 3rd line. We don't want so many issues. You take so many drugs together with these rifamycins, you may have a lot of issues. They are potent enzyme inducers. So we don't normally take them by heart. You have to make sure that there is the need to take before you take them. Now, active peptic ulcer, that is when somebody has ulcer and the person bleeds. So if you have a bleeding ulcers, then we say that you have active peptic ulcer. Now, for active peptic ulcer, you may have to do... Yeah, hello?
Yes, sir. Sir, please, treatment with the level. You told us the dose of the level. What of the amoxicillin? How do they dose
1 gram, normal 1 gram. Normal 1 gram.
Okay, thank you.
Then this one's the normal 20. Okay, so if somebody has ulcer and the person bleeds, then we say that the person is having active peptic ulcer. You know what bleeding can do. Excessive anemia that can lead even to death. So in that case, then there is the need to confirm the bleeding and also find some means to stop it and even prevent rebleeding. This will be our main target. So our treatment goals is to confirm the bleed, we need to stop it, and prevent the recurrence. So how do you do it? You need to assess, because at times stopping the bleeding, you may have to do some invasive procedures to stop the bleeding. For example, endoscopic electrocoagulation, where through endoscopy, you send some electrical input in there, then that will heal the wound. It will just make sure that it will cause coagulation at the surface of the wound, and there will be no more bleeding. This is an invasive technique. So before you do such an invasive technique, you should be able to confirm and then decide whether even there is the need to do so. At times, the person may be bleeding, but it may not be that significant to warrant such an invasive procedure. And therefore, to decide whether to go in or not, because if you are not going, then you are using normal conservative treatment strategies to minimize the bleed. So if maybe the bleeding is extensive or the soil is extensive, then that is when you do the most aggressive form of treating the bleed. For example, through the endoscopic electrocoagulation. And this is invasive. So you don't need to risk and then waste anybody's time and then put the patient under stress. You do this when it is required. How do you know that, this patient qualified for this procedure or not? That is when you use the Blatchford score. So the Blatchford score will help you to assess the need to do the endoscopic treatment or not. If not, you are putting the patient at an increased risk. You putting the tube through the patient, you can cause injury. It's expensive and you waste everybody's time. So before you decide on whether to do such invasive procedure for the treatment of bleeding ulcers or not, you have to score the patient to be sure that, yes, this patient needs the invasive procedure or not. And you can use the Blatchford score to do so. So for the Blatchford score, it is saying that if a patient fits all the criteria below, then the patient doesn't need endoscopic treatment. It means that you are not going to do the endoscopic electrocoagulation. You use consecutive therapy, the triple therapy and what have you, and the patient will be healed. The bleed will stop. So if the person is actually bleeding and it's expensive, you realize that you are going to have bleeding that can affect perfusion. Bleeding can lead to hypovolemia, and this can affect perfusion of the kidneys. This can cause acute kidney damage that will have an effect on the urea and the creatinine. But if you check and then the urea and the creatinine concentrations are within range, then it means you don't have such a problem. The bleeding is not extensive. The person is not having hypovolemia affecting the kidney function. So there is no kidney dysfunction. If the person is bleeding, there will be extensive anemia. So if you check and the person is even having, like a male patient, hemoglobin concentration more than 13, then the person is not having any extensive bleeding. And for ladies, if it's more than 12. So it means the bleeding is not extensive. If you are bleeding, hypovolemia occurs, you are likely going to have reduced BP. For example, systolic BP will reduce. It can even reduce to below 90. If the bleeding is not much and the person is okay, systolic BP will be normal. So when you check and then systolic BP is more than 110, then it means there is no cause for alarm. If the systolic BP decreases, of course, it will affect the pulse, and the pulse will have to go up if the systolic BP actually decreases. These are inversely proportional to each other. So once the pulse is normal below 100, and then between 160, let's say between 160, and it means the person is okay. So when you have all these outcomes, it means the person is okay and the bleeding is not extensive, and for that matter, don't do the aggressive endoscopic management. Go by what? Normal conservative treatment, and the person will be okay. There is no cause for alarm because the person will have to pay more for this treatment. it puts the patient at risk of even additional complications from the treatment. You waste staff time. You don't have enough staff to waste some of them on just one patient. So once the person qualifies this, no endoscopic treatment. If the person fails this, then of course, there may be the need to do an endoscopic treatment. But before you do the endoscopic treatment, before you do it, you also need to score the patient to know the mortality risk before you do your endoscopic treatment. This is what we mean by the ROCO score. So it is the ROCO score that we use to assess the person's risk when it comes to mortality before you do an endoscopic treatment. So you do the pre-endoscopic ROCO score. So these are the variables, the parameters that you consider and how you score them depending on the situation. So for example, if the person's age is below 60, you don't score, it's 0. If there is no shock, that is, if the systolic BP is above 100 and the pulse is below 100, that one too is 0, no score. And if you don't have any comorbidities, no score. But when the person is aging, elderly, between 60 to 79, 1, above 82. If you have signs of shock, tachycardia and those things, meaning the systolic BP has reduced and therefore there is reflex tachycardia. And this is possibly as a result of the hypovolemia from the excessive bleeding. You score 1. If you have hypotension, you score 2. Then if there are comorbidities like heart failure, ischemic disease, whatever, you score 2. Renal, liver failure and other malignancies, you score 3. At the end of the day, you add everything together. Scores below 3 means that there is no cause for alarm. The person don't have any high risk to die. But if you add everything together and then the ROCO score, the pre-endoscopic ROCO score is greater than 8, then it means that there is danger. The person is at risk of dying. In that case, you quickly go in there and then arrest the situation. Then after the treatment, you have to do your post-endoscopic ROCO score. There was a problem, you claim that you have solved the problem. To what extent did the problem solve? Are you going to have rebleeding or not? So this post-endoscopic ROCO score will help us to know whether the person is still at risk of dying and rebleeding rates, because you have done some intervention and you need to assess. So similar parameters to the post, but this time we've added diagnosis to it and the major stigmata. So you score the person based on these parameters, and then generally, if you add everything and you get 4 and above, then it means that even after the treatment, the person still has a higher mortality risk, and there is still a very high tendency that the person will rebleed. So that is the scores. So you have the Blatchford score that tells us whether we need to go in there or not. Then if you have to go in, then you score. So baseline score, the person's mortality risk before the endoscopic intervention. And after you have given the intervention, you do the post-ROCO score. That is the post-endoscopic ROCO score to know the way forward. Even after the intervention, is the person going to be okay? Is the person still going to die anyway? That means your treatment couldn't help the person in any way. It was a bad case, bad prognosis. Then you will know. Any question? We are almost done. Almost. About 1 or 2 slides, then we are done. So now, if let's say you do your Blatchford score, and then there is no need to do the endoscopic strategies. So you are going to do the conservative treatment with drugs to help arrest the bleed. How can drugs is to stop bleeding? Others too we use, and then we claim that they can stop. There is this findings that if you are able to keep the pH of the gastric and the duodenal regions above 6. If there is an ulcer, there will be a clot that will be formed on the surface of the ulcer during bleeding. Your natural coagulation system will produce a clot to arrest the bleed. If you're able to keep the pH above 6, such pH is able to stabilize the clot on top of the wound, and hence it prevents it from dislodging to cause further bleeding. So if by increasing the pH to above 6 can do this, then PPIs can help manage bleeding, because the PPIs can increase the pH of your GIT. If it is very effective, it can increase it above 6. And above 6, we claim that it will stabilize the clot that is formed on top of the wound, and that helps to prevent further bleeding. And with this, PPIs are utilized a lot when it comes to bleeding ulcers, the conservative therapies. And therefore, it's not surprising that at the world, you see a lot of injectable PPIs being used. It is based on this principle. Increase the pH to above 6, you stabilize the clot on top of the wound. And this prevents further bleeding. You can only achieve this by using high-dose PPIs. So, for example, at the world, normally they do it on an intermittent basis, maybe 40 milligram BD first day, and they change it. But preferably, the recommended regimen is to do either omeprazole or esomeprazole as an example of PPH, the injectables, 80 milligram per IV as a loading dose, roughly over 30 minutes, after which you do 8 milligram per hour for 72 hours. For both omeprazole and esomeprazole, you do same. Then after the 72 hours, you switch to the oral form and you give 40 milligram once daily for the next 4 weeks. And this will be able to manage bleeding that's not extensive. You may also add, in addition to the PPIs, somatostatin analogs like octreotide. That can also help constrict blood vessels and minimize bleeding. Or you do anti-fibrinolytic agents. So this will help to stabilize the fibrin and therefore stabilize the clot. So example, tranexamic acid can be used to prevent fibrin breakdown. Somatostatin analogs constrict blood vessels in the GIT, and therefore bleeding will stop. Any question? If not, this brings us to the end of PUD. Sorry for stretching you too much, but we needed to do this. Any question?
Hello, sir. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Sir, please, my question is, what do you do when an ulcer patient is in pain and you want, because of the excess acid that has been released, and you want to neutralize the acid so that the pain will be lessened, but you said that with your PPI, it needs a high acid medium for it to be able to be activated. So in this case, which one will be the best to do? Do you do your antacid first, then you do the PPI, or what do you do?
Yeah, so the activation of the PPIs that we are talking about is not in the lumen. You get it? It's not in the lumen. It is actually within the basolateral region of the stomach lining, inside, where you find the parietal cells. So as for that place, if we maintain acidity, it is fine. You see the thing? So you wouldn't, and then the ulcer problem is about the lumen, the acid in the lumen. So if you give antacids, you are actually neutralizing the one in the lumen. It's not around the parietal cells. I hope you get it.
Yes, please.
So giving antacids, of course, may not affect the effect of the PPIs, but it is still preferred that you give your PPIs first, 30 minutes before all this. In fact, it is advisable that the PPIs are protected from the stomach pH, because when they are exposed to the lumen pH, they will be activated there. But that is not where they work. They must go inside and then attack the proton pump on the parietal cell. So if you activate them within the lumen by the stomach acid, then they are going to fail. They are not going to work. Because even protonated one, it will affect the absorption into the bloodstream and back to the parietal cells. If you protonate any drug, you have ionized the drug, and absorption is going to be affected. Hence, most of these PPIs, almost all of them are coated. They have enteric coatings to protect them from having contact with the stomach acid. Because if they do, then they will be protonated there. And that's not where they work. They must be absorbed into the bloodstream, then go and enter that space. And when they are protonated, the protonated drug is in the ionized form and absorption will be limited. So we even protect the PPIs by coating them. We give them as enteric coated preparations so that they can dodge the stomach and get into the smaller intestines for absorption. So it is still advisable to do that, but they are protected. So they will dodge the stomach acid, enter the smaller intestines, and get absorbed. Then you can give your antacids. Antacids are normally even preferred after meals, whilst PPIs are given 30 minutes before meals. So that's the strategy. Unfortunately, you can't also use painkillers. The type of pain is not because of that. So it is this PPI that, and then the antacids that can help. Are you okay?
Okay, thank you very much.
Any further questions? Class captain, any announcement?
No, please, I have a question.
Okay.
Sir, so in patients that are G6 PD deficient, the PPIs that will be converted, how in such patients, what do you do?
As in the sulfur.
Yeah.
And so if the structure contains sulfur, then of course it will be difficult. So other means will have to be utilized. Maybe the vonoprazine, unfortunately, it's not here. Or maybe if the H2 receptor antagonists don't contain sulfur, then you have to do. Once a drug contains sulfur, then it will be difficult. It will be difficult to use it in GSPD patients. Because you can't manage one condition and create another. Do no harm. Do no harm. Class captain, your question.
And she has asked it. It was the same thing about the GCPD patient.
Class captain, so the issue with the in-person group, how far?
Yes, so I created a poll and they are still answering. Most of them are actually going for the after class, after Sunday in-person class. It looks like they've changed their minds now. So hopefully I'll end the poll this evening and I'll give you the final feedback.
So it's likely that, is it from next week or from tomorrow?
From tomorrow.
Okay, we may start the 8. I saw 8 p.m. to 10.
Yes, please.
Because if I'm to come there, then I'll have to spend about 5 different meetings or so. And you know, we do it once a week. It may take a lot of time. So
yeah.
All right. So any other announcements? If not,
okay, so for the online class, the meeting Dr. Ishak tomorrow, same time at 5. For those of you complaining about the time, 5 p.m.
Time? 5 p.m.
5 p.m.
When are you closing?
Yes. Usually by 7, we'll be done.
Okay. Because I'm wondering about, as in, we are also
the
starting
link.
At the link.
Yeah.
So if it's just 2 hours, then fine.
Yes.
So
they're usually
we
done
can
by
still have our 8 to 10.
Yes, please, we can.
Okay. All right. So tomorrow we
and
can
those
start.
Of you I'm sorry. So those of you complain about the time, I'm still trying to get him to bring it earlier than the 5 p.m. So I'm still working on it. I'll give you a feedback when that is settled.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to send you these slides together with the word as in document that contains pharmacology on PPIs in particular, then the guidelines from Japan, the do's and don'ts. They have about 23 or so different questions that they've answered as part of the guidelines. What to do when you have this, what to do, the recommendations, first lines, and surgical interventions, what have you. Straightforward. So it's in two parts, the guidelines and then the pharmacokinetics or the pharmacology of PPIs. All right. So if there are no further questions, hello?
Yes, sir, please, I have a question.
Okay.
Okay, so sir, what's the window period between, that's if you've done the first line, how long should you wait before you know that, okay, let's say it didn't work, before you initiate the patient on the second line therapy?
Okay, so if a certain regimen fails to work, even before you complete it yourself, you know, because it's expected that if you are doing a treatment for say 14 days or 10 days, and you've done like 7 days and signs and symptoms are worsening or indifferent, same, then it means that, and maybe you've done everything that you're supposed to do. You have adhered to the regimen, the drugs are on point, doses are okay. Then obviously, by the end of the regimen, let's say the 10th day or the 4th has failed, then there is no need for you to wait. You need to go back to the clinician. That will pair with the end of your regimen. So maybe a day after you end the regimen, he will ask you to come and see him. So he'll book you on that day. You go there and then you tell him, no. Then you have to do other interventions. If there is a need for him to do culture and sensitivity, then of course, you may have to do it. At that point, maybe he may give you some PPIs to control the signs and symptoms whilst waiting for the culture and sensitivity results to help influence the choice of antibiotics. So you don't wait. And normally that's not that what we do. Your review date will synchronize with the last day of your regimen. So you go there and then you give the feedback. Tell him the pain, the pattern. If everything is off, if things are worsening or is the same, then we are not doing good. We have to find out the problem and then attack. So you don't need to wait. Are you okay?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay. So any further questions? If not, we'll end the class. Oh, there is a question there in the chat box. Is it esomeprazole? In fact, I will have to check this PPIs. It roughly has, how does esomeprazole cause osteoporosis in the long-term use? So I'm not sure though, but I think it's maybe the change in pH acidity that may affect the absorption of calcium. So reduced calcium absorption is likely going to attack you and then you get osteoporosis. But I'll confirm. But I'm thinking that this will be the probable mechanism of esomeprazole-induced osteoporosis, long-term use. Increase intragastric pH that may affect and reduce calcium absorption, that you need calcium to increase the crystals, the ions in there. With low calcium in the plasma, low calcium in bone, then osteoporosis will be there, will be at risk of fractures. But I'll confirm, then the next time that you meet, I'll confirm this postulated mechanism and get back to you. Esomeprazole induced osteoporosis. Please remind me when we meet next week. First thing to discuss. Any other question? Class captain, any final comment? If not, then hello.
So please, you can end here.
Oh, okay. All right. Then so catch you next week. Next week, since we've done peptic ulcer, then we have to add GERD.
Good.
We have to add GERD because the two are almost the same. GERD is pretty short, so I'll look at another topic that we can do in addition to GERD. That is, if we finish GERD early. So remember, all the basic principles here, most of them we are going to apply. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, people.
Bye.
Bye.